I'm not going to use
How are you? Just in case you get to pick me. Just like that. There you go. If I'm going relative.
All right, welcome to the February meeting of the Planning Commission. Tonight we're going to be discussing the APA and American Legion site plan amendment, including the GLUP amendment, rezoning, site plan, and also the master transportation plan amendments for that project. If you're here for Y Hotel, that will be heard at our Wednesday meeting along with our commission business. For folks who want to speak on tonight's agenda item, the APA project, please turn your speaker slips in now to Ms. Johnson, the clerk, if you have not already done so. All right, so if there's nothing else, with that, I'd like to turn it over, Madam Clerk, will you please call tonight's first agenda item?
Our item this evening, as spoken, is the APA American Legion project that has 4 parts. 1A is GP-343-17-1, the GLUP. 1B is the rezoning Z-2608-18-1, the site plan. 1C, site plan 449, and 1D, the amendment to the comprehensive plan master transportation plan map. We have Peter Schultz and Rob Gibson staff to present this item this evening.
Mr. Schultz, Mr. Gibson, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a general land use plan request, a rezoning request, and a site plan request for 3445 Washington Boulevard. The requested actions consist of a GLUP change from service commercial and semi-public to medium office apartment hotel, a requested rezoning from R5 one-family and restricted two-family dwelling district and C2 to CO 2.5, a mixed-use district. The requested actions include a new site plan, 160 units, new American Legion post on the ground floor, 7 stories, a range of 90 to 96 total parking spaces, and we'll speak later about the range that staff is recommending. Approximately 70 to 76 residential and 20 American Legion for the American Legion post, and all of the units, 100%, will be affordable, committed affordable units. Location of the site is at 3445 Washington Boulevard in the Washington-Kirkwood Special Glup Study segment. The adjacent properties include the YMCA, the cemetery, and on the northwest corner, the 11th Street development. Here you see pictures of existing conditions, including the overhead utilities and narrow sidewalk along Washington Boulevard, and then a view from the rear of the property, seeing where especially the property abuts single-family, single-family development on 12th Road North. Background for the site is 1930s. The American Legion purchases the site, and from the 1930s to 1983 uses the site by right. In 1959, they construct the existing American Legion post. In 1983, they had a retroactive use permit approved to permit an addition that was constructed at that time. The building has been added on several times over the years. Building is currently not ADA compliant. November 2017, to refresh your memory, the county board adopted what's called the Washington Boulevard and Kirkwood Road Special Glup Study Plus and Concept Plan, and at that time also approved requests to advertise for changes to the general land use plan. They didn't act on the changes to the general land use plan. They create the request to advertise. The actual changes would be concurrent with the site plan applications as they come in. The proposed GLUP amendment here, as you see, the existing GLUP on the left is, they did overlay the site with Note 27, the county board in 2017, to call this area part of that special GLUP study area. So you can see it's split between semi-public on the north and service commercial on the south. The advertised GLUP change is going to be from service commercial and semi-public to medium office apartment hotel, which is the same category that the county board authorized in 2017. And we see here what the categories are. The medium office apartment hotel allows equivalent zoning district, CO 2.5, and you see the existing zoning of the property split again, more or less along the lines of the GLUP from R5 and C2. The request is to rezone that entire tract to CO 2.5, which is the equivalent GLUP category in density and uses to that medium office apartment hotel that was advertised. Just to give you an orientation of the proposed site plan, the applicant will show more architectural details in their presentation. The site plan ground floor plan, just to give you an idea of how the property is laid out on the ground floor. At the front of the property is the proposed new American Legion space, approximately 6,700 square feet of new space, which is about half of the existing gross floor area of the existing building. It will all be on one level at the ground floor level fronting on Washington Boulevard. Loading and trash off of the new segment of North Kansas Street, bike storage directly off of North Kansas Street, parking garage entrance, and residential amenity space towards the rear. And then towards the east, where there is a new public right-of-way to the north and private space units, dwelling units. As I said, the special study was adopted guidance for this area by the county board in 2017. It consisted of 15 guiding principles and 3 concept maps by which to guide potential applications for this area. I won't go through all of the guiding principles, but the applicant in their presentation will show how they comply in many of the areas. The plan also designated what they thought were natural redevelopment areas, the YMCA site being the largest, the American Legion, roughly the 3rd largest, and the 11th Street development. This is a site consolidation that they encouraged of several properties. The American Legion and YMCA are large contiguous properties that they didn't generally recommend for or needing to be encouraged to consolidate with other properties. It was considered that those properties could develop on their own. And then we see to the west here additional areas that were included in the GLUP study area, these existing commercial areas. The Special GLUP Study Plus had 3 concept maps, as I mentioned, and the first concept map is the circulation, public rights-of-way, and how pedestrians, cyclists, and vehicles all circulate through the site. Most notably in this location, plan recommends a north-south, both pedestrian, bicycle, and vehicular connection to connect with what they show as intersection improvements here, which is the existing traffic light and crosswalk, pedestrian-activated crosswalk at this point across from the Giant and GMU, to strengthen the pedestrian bike connection to the GMU campus and Virginia Square Metro Station, be able to walk through that property. So the proposal generally is here on the west side. As you see in note 2, creations of new streets is encouraged if it's near property lines to be shared among property owners in order to allow them to redevelop and to cut down on the number of curb cuts along Washington Boulevard. So we have these 2 new north-south connections here that were generally identified as places to be where the parking and loading could be, which is discouraged off of Washington Boulevard. You see the vehicular curves around to the east generally to Kirkwood Road. Now keep in mind the plan also says these are conceptual areas. This is with final development, final locations and alignments can be set. Notice here at 12th Road North that the pedestrian and bicycle connection only is recommended. This dotted blue line here represents pedestrian and bike access, where the yellow arrows represent areas generally meant for vehicles. And then the typology of the streets was generally encouraged to be shared streets, alleys, or pedestrian priority streets. And the plan also has some examples of how these streets could look from a street was mostly asphalt with a driveway apron here to possible full and also here in the Festival Street, currently on behind 13th Street in Clarendon, along with other kinds of shared streets like these in various cities across the country. The proposed circulation plan in this site plan follows these recommendations. I've sort of overlaid what the the special GLUP study recommends. This is the area called for intersection improvements. The crosswalk is shifted over in order to accommodate the actual entrance here. The applicant is providing a 26-foot wide street to accommodate two-way traffic and bicycle, or I should say emergency vehicle facilities. The extra 4 feet here for the fire lane is needed for the outriggers of a ladder truck. They're also providing parallel on-street parking on the east side, 6-foot planting strip, 6-foot sidewalk up against the property here. The first phase of this construction, this is the segment of the street that's going to be most heavily used, the garage entrance right here. As you can see below this, and I'll show a little later, there would be a special pavement treatment for this area that's intended to be only fire access. And I will mention later that fire access is required to 12th Road North. That was something not contemplated in the plan, but because of the building and the need for fire trucks to exit, the connection to 12th Road for emergency vehicles only is necessary, and how that's handled we'll mention later. The way this is set up by the applicant does not prevent the build-out of the plan. This will allow, for instance, to the west here, Casual Adventure to share a parking and loading space off of here, thus taking it off of Washington Boulevard. Once the YMCA redevelops, the applicant is right now going to construct a full east-west connection here. Let me see. This shows the special treatment here that's proposed for the area to be dedicated. This will be taken over and maintained by the county. This is a county-approved special treatment. The east-west connection, the applicant is actually going to construct a streetscape and sidewalk at this time. They will dedicate a 9-foot area for a vehicular travel way that will be interim planted, but it will be graded. The reason here, this is going to be eventually that connection to Kirkwood Road. It is not needed at this time. It's not needed for fire access at this time. It's not being constructed at this time, as it will not lead anywhere, but the applicant is designing the building so that there is a pedestrian interest and get a start on planting street trees in this area. The applicant is dedicating There's a full 25-foot setback. 20 feet is dedicated to the county, either in easement or in fee simple. The 5-foot is just an additional setback so that green planting in front of the dwelling units that front on that area. And it is generally expected that the YMCA will dedicate the exact same area, 20 feet of sidewalk and travelway, and then perhaps a 5-foot setback from that. But what's being dedicated is 20 feet. Only pedestrians, bicycles, and emergency vehicles will access 12th Road North. It is not intended as per the plan for vehicular general circulation and travel. And in this case, this is the preferred county fire marshal is to have a 22-foot wide emergency access here with a chain and bollards that is accessible by a key from the fire marshal. However, also leaving 5 feet open for the pedestrians and cyclists to come through to this area. This is just one concept of how the full east-west connection could be built. It depends on what the YMCA comes up with in a development plan. This is the 11th Street development that has currently started the site plan review committee process. This is just one of the scenarios of how this new 12th Road, or whatever the connection will be called, it is meant for vehicles, pedestrians, and cyclists to go out to Kirkwood Road. It could do, this is the YMCA property in the middle here. It cannot share a property line with its neighboring properties. Here it is sharing one half of the right-of-way here, and here it's showing sharing one half of the right-of-way here. This is, again, just illustrative, one possible scenario, but it is not precluding build-out of what is intended to be that circulation network in the superblock. The next concept map in the plan is the height and form concept map. Generally 6 to 7 stories with tapering down to 3 stories where it starts to abut the new north-south street and the new single-family residential community next to it. It does say, the plan does say the height zones are general, and recommended height maximums up to 70 to 80 feet, respectively 80 feet for a 7-story building. The height and tapering here, this is from kind of looking from the north on the west side of the property where the new public street, the new North Kansas Street is going to be. The tapering, 3 stories here. An additional, so this is about 14 feet setback. An additional 13 feet at the next level, and then the full height of the building up to 7 stories, which is 74 feet from the property line shared with a single-family house. If you went to the wall of the single-family house, it would be about 82 feet. In fact, that is about the exact height of the building, 82 feet 8 inches, which does slightly exceed the recommendation of the plan. The tapered levels will have green roofs. As you see in this area, there's also a large area of a 1-story building over the parking garage entrance here. This is in order to create it's about 50 by 40, creates a light well for, and windows for these units that are here. So in that particular case, it does exceed the recommendations of the tapering in the plan, which could have called for 3 stories the entire way. The building is 7 stories, which is the maximum height in stories. It is 82 feet 8 inches. It is to permit, it does allow extra ground floor height for a couple reasons. One is to allow the American Legion space to be properly vented. There will be a commercial kitchen there to be used. The parking and loading, because that changed also during the course of the development, as the applicant will show you as it went through the site plan review committee process, to create the height needed while keeping the ramp angle at a reasonable pace. So the building is 2 feet 8 inches higher than recommended. I should mention that this isn't a zoning ordinance modification because the CO 2.5 zoning district actually measures height in stories and permits residential buildings to be up to 16 stories in height, which is certainly not the case here. The special study also had a land use concept map. It's rather broad in its recommendation of land use. It could have been residential, hotel, or commercial. It does recommend in Note 1 keeping existing civic and institutional uses. One of the multiple principles in this special GLUP study area were to encourage and retain these semi-public institutional uses like the YMCA and like the American Legion, and to integrate them into new development. It recommends retail or retail equivalent along Washington Boulevard. In this case, the applicant is proposing a multifamily residential building reusing the American Legion, which is going to be located on the ground floor in a space, and the plan for this purposes considers these civic semi-public spaces as a retail equivalent use for this area. The requested zoning modifications, probably the most notable requested modification they're asking for is the residential parking. The total parking ratio of 0.43 spaces, a minimum per unit, with a minimum of 0.38 spaces per dwelling unit and a minimum of 0.05 visitor spaces per unit. Most of the time in site plans, we wrap together the visitor and the residential parking. In this particular case, going through its staff's analysis, we felt that mandating some visitor spaces was appropriate in this situation. Usually, because residential parking conflates both residential and visitor spaces, an applicant can allocate through their parking management plan as necessary. We thought because of the low parking ratio, in this particular case, it was appropriate as part of that ratio to have some mandatory visitor spaces. So that was the point, and that generally corresponds to the required visitor spaces if one was to use the new residential parking study, which we are not doing here because this is out of the location of it. Now, the reason the staff is recommending a range of 70 to 76 spaces per unit, no fewer than 70, I should say 70 to 76 spaces total, no fewer than 70. That range is to allow flexibility in offering handicap parking spaces. Right now, the applicant is proposing in their plan to meet the ADA requirements. However, there are 10 type A handicapped units, and so we have allowed the flexibility in the conditions of approval to allow them to convert. Generally, it's 3 regular parking spaces to 2 handicapped spaces in order to convert up to 10 handicapped spaces to match any possible demand from those type A units, and that's something that they can do to be flexible after approval through their parking management plan. Also, there are difficult negotiations with the applicant. We got them to relocate a stormwater vault out of the public right-of-way. We wanted the streets to be dedicated in fee simple and maintained by the county, and most likely that will continue throughout the study area. So relocating a stormwater vault inside the parking garage or slightly below it might affect up to 3 parking spaces. We don't know for a fact until they do detailed engineering, so we built in flexibility there. But there's an absolute floor minimum of that 0.43 spaces per unit, 0.38 for the units, and 0.05 for the residents. So there will never be fewer than 70. The parking modification request is justified by numerous policies by the county, including the parking space and curb management plan, by the master transportation plan. Our affordable housing master plan recommends, they don't recommend specific formulas, but they do recommend that these things be taken into account when constructing affordable housing. The special GLUP study, also in its principle 5, says provide the appropriate level of parking for the density and programs associated with new development projects. This illustration to the left here is taken from the residential parking study, which is we are not using as the applicant is not using, and we are not using as a justification for supporting the parking ratio, but it is to show you that it is immediately across from a designated metro area, and in fact would be located in the band of 0.21, 0.26. The 80% AMI units would be probably around either 0.3 or 0.4. So generally at the ratio higher than the ratio that would be recommended here. We have a ratio here of, I should say, AMI of 30 to 80% in this building, no units exceeding 80%, and the majority being less than 80%. Among some of the reasons that staff supports the residential parking modification, it is within a quarter-mile walking distance of the Virginia Square Metro Rail Station. Although it is not located in what is designated as a metro corridor, it is within that 1/4 mile. There is frequent bus service. 38B operates 7 days a week at no less than a 30-minute headway. All of the 160 units are committed affordable at an average of 60% AMI. There is an existing pedestrian activated traffic light at the site that the applicant will slightly relocate, but keep the ground level bike room directly accessible from the street. That giant supermarket directly across the street, accessible by that activated signal. The conditions also, we will allow the applicant and American Legion to share visitor parking if at periods of low demand of the American Legion, perhaps during the daytime. Through their parking management plan, they can share parking spaces. The American Legion's 20 parking spaces exceeds our general standards, as you'll see in the next slides. And also, they do agree to additional transportation demand management. The standard is always every new resident and every new on-site employee gets a preloaded Smart Trip card or a 1-year bike share or car share membership. In this case, for up to 90 households, the applicant agrees to annually, for the life of the building, a preloaded $65 Metro card, Smart Trip card, car share membership, or a bike share membership for all of those units for which there is not a dedicated parking space. The American Legion parking itself, they're proposing 20 parking spaces for the use of the American Legion. That's 1 space for every 338 square feet of GFA. It's slightly a lower ratio than is required by strictly by the zoning ordinance. However, through site plan projects, we almost always, at least in the last few decades, have a standard of 1 to 580 or 1 to 630 if it's in a metro station area. And this greatly exceeds that. And we feel that the American Legion use would be generally equivalent to a retail use, perhaps a restaurant type use with the same types of hours of usage and perhaps the number of vehicles accessing that. The applicant is asking for additional density for the provision of affordable housing. 14 of the dwelling units, the applicant is asking over the base density that is permitted. They are providing units 30 to 80% at area median income for 75 years committed. It's only a 9.5% additional density. You remember seeing most site plans, they try to get the maximum density available, which is 25% in this particular case because of the height cap to the floor cap. They can't take advantage of that, but it's 9.5%, well under the zoning ordinance's cap on an affordable housing bonus. There we go. The applicant is asking for a modification of the, let's see, modification for the fence height to place an 8-foot opaque fence along the adjacent properties are up to 8 feet. You'll see in their presentation the fence that they propose to put in a 2-foot strip adjacent to single-family residential properties in order to shield them from vehicles entering and exiting, especially from headlights. The site plan features and improvements include 100% committed affordable housing for 75 years. 38% of the units are at 50% or less of AMI. 70% of the dwelling units are 2 to 3 bedroom units. Applicant is proposing the beginnings of the new street network, the construction and dedication to the public of a full new north-south street, North Kansas Street, with sidewalk and street trees. Construction and dedication of new public sidewalk and streetscape for the east-west connection, and grading and dedication for a new the travel lane for that. Additional transportation demand management features, as I mentioned before. The applicant required to maintain a fence or wall with plantings that are possible in the 2-foot strip adjacent to single-family dwellings. provision of and reuse of the American Legion property. The American Legion will reoccupy the site as it has for 90 years. It will underground the utilities. It will enhance the streetscape of Washington Boulevard, one of the goals of the sector plan, and provide an in-building wireless first responders network among the other base requirements. Staff therefore recommends, the analysis is that it does advance the goals of the GLUP and the concept plan, the special GLUP study. It's a mixed-use reuse of the American Legion post with affordable housing and a new American Legion post. It provides that beginnings of that new bicycle and pedestrian and vehicular network to break up that super block. It advances the design goals with tapering to the community that exceeds the recommendation, designs all sides to be pedestrian friendly. It advances the goals of our comprehensive plan. The Affordable Housing Master Plan is just one element of our comprehensive plan, and it provides 160 units of new committed affordable housing in generally a very transit-rich environment, and advances the Master Transportation Plan goals of breaking up these super blocks, providing more access for pedestrians and bicycles to a pedestrian and bicycle network, and provides enhanced streetscapes in all new locations. Therefore, staff recommends approval of the general land use plan amendment from service, commercial, and semi-public to the medium office apartment hotel. Staff recommends a rezoning from R5 and C2 to CO 2.5. And then staff recommends a site plan for that 160-unit multifamily dwelling with ground floor American Legion semi-public use with the modifications of the use regulations as recommended, with the conditions in this, as recommended in the staff report. This ends the staff presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. Mr. Gibson, do you have anything to add? Are you here for questions?
Would you like the MTP amendment presented now?
Mr. Viola or you, Mr. Gibson, want to give
Yeah.
the MTP amendment presentation?
Peter's going to pull it up here in a second. And as you mentioned, I'm here with Richard Viola from Transportation Planning. And let's see if we can get the present.
Which one
It is on the left-hand side. That one. There we go. So we're here to talk about, I think this is the full presentation. I'll need to skip through to the, keep on going. Keep on going. Keep on going. Should be another entry or slide. Keep on going. There you go. Okay. Sorry about that. So this is a Master Transportation Plan amendment to add a new segment of North Kansas Street to the MTP map, to name that segment North Kansas Street, and to designate it, staff is recommending designating the southern portion as an urban center local street and the northern portion as a shared street. The proposed changes are highlighted in this map on this plan. The area was initially identified in association with the special GLUP study plus concept plan as an area for new streets, as Peter has discussed throughout the process. If you go to the next. So there are a number of reasons why staff came to the recommendation, particularly to split the designation of the street from as an urban center local street and as a shared street. There are three principal reasons why we're looking at the southern section being designated as urban center local, as opposed to what is recommended in the special GLUP study, which is a shared street for the streets, shared street, alley, or pedestrian priority street, as identified in the special GLUP study. We looked at this very closely, and we've heard a lot of discussion throughout the SPRC process. The first reason that we really looked at this is that we feel that the functionality of this space is going to be different than a shared street. And so we don't think that naming something a shared space but having it function completely different is the appropriate approach on the MTP. And there's three reasons why we think it will function different. The first reason is that signalization at Washington Boulevard. signalization of intersections are really designed to provide a specific legal designation of the priority of the right-of-way. And as you start to do that, when you mix the pedestrians and the vehicles in the travel lanes, which would be feeding into that signal, it sends conflicting messages for how the space should be used. So that's one reason why we think that it's better to, at this segment, to separate the users as shown, providing dedicated vehicle space and dedicated pedestrian space with bikes being able to use either under state code. The second reason is because of the width and the width of the street, because it needs to provide fire access. That 26-foot area is wide enough that we don't think it functions as much like a shared street. There are 3 times that you really like to have shared streets where pedestrians and vehicles are mixing. We like to see that when you have maybe a small neighborhood street where you don't have curb and gutter, very much similar to 12th Street North, which is north of this site, where you'll have both very small pedestrian volumes and very small vehicular volumes. So a shared street in that case functions very well. You also don't mind seeing it in urban areas where you have very high pedestrian volumes and relatively low vehicular volumes for the space, so that the understanding is that the pedestrian can take and be part of the space because of the volumes of pedestrians that you see there versus the number of cars. In this space, what we see is relatively low pedestrian and relatively low vehicular volumes. So there could be times when motorists regularly drive in this space, don't see pedestrians, and then when there is a pedestrian in what is otherwise perceived as the travel way, people think that they have the space appropriately. So we want to shy away from that in this case. So that's about the width of the space. We feel that the width is too wide to sort of have a pedestrian maintain its presence in that space without being conflicted with approaching vehicles. And so the traffic signal, the width, and the volumes of the pedestrians and vehicles comparatively. But what we have done is we've added a number of features in this area in the design of the plan such that it supports the visual feel of more of a shared street and actually then transitions into a shared street. Some of the things in the design include a driveway apron at the edge of the turn-in off of Washington Boulevard. Second element is that the asphalt and the sidewalks are relatively at the same grade, putting everybody at the same presence while they still have their own space, as shown here. And then the third approach is the street trees and other elements are integrated similarly at grade. So that's why we feel that the southern segment should be urban center local. However, design elements have been integrated to make it a lower speed roadway. And next slide. And so what we did do is we looked at the way that this road will function until the rest of the network is delivered. And until the YMCA site develops, the northern portion of the road, north of the project's garage, will support almost no vehicular traffic. There is a parking space for short-term parking in that area, but there is no place for them to go. They can't exit out onto 12th, and they can't proceed on any other vehicular network. So in that area, we've proposed, and then the applicant has proposed to instead of using asphalt, to use a paver system that would make this space a lot more of a shared space. And it's also where the vehicle volumes are almost sort of in the 10s and 20s daily as opposed to hundreds or thousands. And so this section, while it is similar at 47 feet, will have a slightly different feel because of the pavers. And so in that case, we recommend a shared street typology on the map. And there you go. Next. So with that, staff recommends to the Planning Commission to recommend to the board to adopt the attached resolution to approve an amendment to the MTP map as shown in Figure 1 of the attached staff report to add a new segment of North Kansas Street north of Washington Boulevard with the typologies as shown.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Mr. Viola, anything to add? Thank you. We'll now turn to the applicant. Ms. Romero?
Great. Good evening. My name is Carmen Romero, representing the applicant, the Arlington Partnership for Affordable Housing, joined by with me by my CEO, Nina Janapal. We're a 30-year-old nonprofit developer committed to the preservation and creation of high-quality affordable housing in our community. And I want to start off by thanking all of you. So many of you joined us for SPRC meetings, but also to thank the citizens who really engaged actively with us in thoughtful conversation and collaboration, and I think make this a better project through the course of SPRC. Let's see. You all know the site. It's a 1.33 acre site. We've been working with the American Legion since 2016 on their vision for redevelopment and rebirth. But what guided us was really all the work we did with the community, as well as with the other stakeholders, the YMCA, 11th Street Development, the civic associations that surrounded us, on what are the guiding principles for the redevelopment of this block. And you're going to see as the design team walks you through our design, the care that we took to really transition to adjacent residential neighborhoods, to enhance the streetscape, to provide a mix of market rate and affordable housing, to support the modernization of the American Legion, as well as to ensure that we are using height appropriately and to try to think about all the facades thoughtfully so there's no back of the house on this project. You heard a lot about this, so I'm not going to spend any time on this, but we can answer questions later. But what I did want to ask is for you guys to consider why. Why is this project important? And it's because the affordable housing crisis in Arlington is one where we've lost 85% of our market rate affordable housing since the year 2000. A project of this magnitude, 160 units in the RB corridor, is an incredible down payment towards our annual goal of anywhere from 600 units a year is where we'd like to get to. We're doing more like 300. So this project represents a huge investment, and it's really made possible by the generosity of the American Legion, who could have sold this to anyone, you know, market rate developers, but instead they chose affordable housing as a group they wanted to partner with to do more than just recreate themselves. So here what we're going to get instead is 160 units of affordable housing, 100% CAF, majority 2 and 3 bedrooms with a range of AMI. We're also going to do Earthcraft Gold as our green standard for the development. It's also another innovative project in the sense that we can build this in a multimodal site and really start delivering affordable housing for the car-free diet potential tenant. And at $50,000 a unit in hard costs for delivering a parking spot, that'll go a long way to help us develop more affordable housing the more we can develop in areas that have access to transit. And obviously the new home for the American Legion Post 139 is going to own a condo in our first floor as our retail equivalent. Further innovation on this project is for the first time ever, APA, and actually this is only the second project in the Commonwealth that will do this, will be offering a veterans preference for 50% of the units out of the 160 that we develop, so that if someone is served, they will be able to rise to the top of the priority list when we go to lease up the unit. We are working with other groups that can bring veteran services into our common areas. The folks that we're talking to today are the state's Department of Veteran Services, the American Legion Corporate Office, Volunteers of America, Serving Together, the Joint Base at Fort Myer Henderson Hall, Department of Human Services, MVAC, and others. And with that, I'm also, later on during public comment, you'll hear from the post commander who's lived in Arlington for many, many years. He's going to give you his perspective on their future activities. But I'm going to now turn it over to the design team to walk you through the presentation.
Good evening. I'm Robert Atkinson, an Associate Principal and Vice President with Davis Cutter Scott Architects. And I just want to start out by saying this is a project that's brought our company a lot of satisfaction because we think it's a one where we have the opportunity to really give back to the community. Want to go through, as Carmen said, we made a number of different changes throughout the SPRC process, suggested by staff, suggested by you, suggested by the community. One of the significant ones was relocating the garage entrance, which had been at the far northern end of the property along the new street. And it moved approximately 80 feet south so that it's not directly opposite any of the residential properties, or at least the closest one. Oh, I'm not very good with this technology thing. We added an additional level of brick, which I think you'll see is really helped the building. It makes it look slimmer, and it really reinforces the idea of base, middle, and top more than I think what our original design did. Enhanced finishes to the pedestrian-friendly street design. If you look on the left, it's perhaps a bit stark. You look on the right, it's actually quite a bit richer, and I think it creates a better environment for our neighbors across the street. The enhanced walkway design, again on the left, it would be nice, but I think what you see on the right is a much richer architectural palette and landscape architecture palette, while at the same time enhancing the experience of the livability for the people whose units are going to be on that side of the building. This is the big ticket item, which is undergrounding the transformer, and it's engendered a lot of discussion, but we were eventually able to find a way to do that, which was something that staff was very concerned about. This is the final site plan. If you'll notice on the bottom of the building in the light green, that's the American Legion space. The lighter area above that is where the loading dock and some of the ancillary spaces along that are associated with that are there. The purple area is an at-grade bike storage. There's an additional bike storage in the parking garage, and we actually exceed the required bike parking by I think 3 or 4 spaces. The purple area is the APA's amenity space. The yellow is their leasing office, and the remainder of it is apartments. You'll notice that there's a corridor that connects between the Legion space and the APA's amenity space. That's deliberate so that if there are programs, because of the veterans that will be living in the residential portion of the property, and also with the American Legion, so that could be easily accommodated. This is the view from Washington Boulevard. You're looking towards the northeast. You'll see the American Legion on the bottom of the building. If you look further north or to your left, you'll see where this stepping that Peter discussed is, and you also see a little bit of the gap, the one-story section of the building above the parking garage entrance. And this is a night view of this same location. And then these are just some massing studies that give you an idea about how this F-shaped building is put together. And I think probably the most important is the one on the bottom left, where it shows the stepping of the building away from the neighborhood.
Hi, I'm Karen White. I'm with Walter Phillips, and I'm going to walk you around the site and give you some detailed information about the sections around the site. So here you have Washington Boulevard, and what we're proposing here is we are keeping the existing travel lanes as they are today, and we are proposing a new 7-foot wide parking lane, which holds 1 parking space in front of our site. Then we have a 6-foot landscape strip, and then a 10-foot clear sidewalk. Here, as we go around the site, this is the north-south alley or street that was discussed that we are now dedicating to the county. Here's that section here. So you'll see we are dedicating 26 feet of right-of-way, which is the 2 11-foot travel lanes and that extra 4-foot area for the fire access. There's a 2-foot strip that's between the dedicated area and the adjacent property that will be in an outlot that will be conveyed to Arlington County. Moving in the other direction, adjacent to the travel lanes, we have a parking lane, which has 4 parking spaces up and down the alley, which is 7 feet wide. We have a 5-foot landscape planter, which is also our bioretention. And then we have a 6-foot clear sidewalk. So we have a 19-foot public access easement for the parking, landscaping, and sidewalk. Here is another view. This is kind of the area towards the end of the north-south alley, adjacent to the 12th Road. Here's this section XX is really what we're going to put there. So the emergency vehicles does need to turn down 12th Road to when they leave the site. So there will be bollards with a chain that the fire department can unlock to remove when they need to exit the site. And you can see here we are proposing some fencing to screen the proposed road and the single-family homes, but there's a 5-foot wide area opening for pedestrians and bikes to make their way from our proposed street to 12th Road. And then along the northern side here, this is where we have the 9-foot dedication. We have an 11-foot public sidewalk and utility easement, which will have a 5-foot landscape strip and 6-foot sidewalk. The thought is that that 5-foot landscape strip will contain what could be future street trees for whatever's done in this 9-foot dedication area. And then we have another 5-foot buffer between the public sidewalk and our building for some plantings, more bioretention, kind of a building zone. And I'm going to hand it back.
Okay, this is a view of what it's going to be like if you're driving out of the building onto the new street. Then this is some representative examples, although we haven't exactly selected the fence that we'll be using, but I think these emphasize that this is going to be a high quality, very architectural element. Okay, one of the things that came up during the public process was what's it going to be like with cars driving out of the garage at night. So we got information from Federal Highways Administration looking at their standards for headlight projections, headlight cutoffs, all that. So this will give you a pretty good idea of the fact that there should not be, especially because of the fence, a lot of impact on the adjacent neighbors. Peter covered, I thought, this very well, but this illustrates the setbacks, and actually from the house, nearest house, to the 7-story section of the building is 82 feet, roughly. And then the closest from the 3-story area to the house is about 55 feet. Here are the elevations to give you an idea about some of the different materials. We have the material board over here, but it's a combination of brick, metal, decorative cementitious board. So it's very high quality materials throughout. Again, looking at the elevations. The public spaces, and I apologize, I neglected to really point these out when I was talking about the site plan, but our intent is to have a very rich environment for the residents here at APA, American Legion. These are the areas that would be adjacent to the residential units on the backside of the property that you saw before. So play spaces, unprogrammed spaces where the community can really come together and get to know each other and socialize. There's a connecting space from the APA space to the Legion space, so it's continuous. There's not like a gate or anything there. It's all part and parcel of one thing. And then on the bottom right, you see the Legion space, and then up the upper left is the entrance to the Legion. There was a question that came up while we were going through the approval process about one of the trees that we were using, and maybe it wasn't the right tree to use. So land designer, landscape architect, had discussions with the county's arborists and landscape architects, and came up with a tree palette that everybody agrees would be the right choices for this location.
Good evening. There we go. I'm Dan Van Pelt with Grove Slade. We did the transportation study, the multimodal transportation review for this project. I'm going to walk you through just some of the, excuse me, some of the highlights of the transportation and parking. The site is located here on the figure that's just the right of the slide along Washington Boulevard. Kirkwood is the next, I guess, nearest major cross street to the east. It gets a walker's paradise score of 92. It's also very well served by transit, gets high transit score and bike scores. We're about 5 to 6 minute walk from Virginia Square Metro Station. Clarendon is just a little further walk to the east. There's 4 bus routes in the vicinity. The 38B is pretty much right at the out the front door in Washington, with service to the Ballston Metro Station and to Farragut Square. The site is already really connected, well connected for pedestrian and bicycles, but it's going to certainly improve the overall connectivity, as so others have talked about this evening. It's also going to improve the fabric of Washington Boulevard along the frontage of the site. There's access to parks in the neighborhood, and I think as mentioned, there's a grocery store that's immediately across the street. The residents of this project will also have access to the Capital Bike Share program, and the project will be members of the community partners part of that program. And I think it's been touched on, the bike parking. One of the great things about this project is we actually have bicycle parking right at the ground floor level, so you can just roll right in. There will be a transportation and management plan for this project that begins with the designation of the TDM transportation coordinator. There will be a contribution of $6,900 per year to ACCS, Arlington County Commuter Services. Each new tenant is going to get $65 towards a preloaded Smart Trip card, or towards a car sharing membership or bike share membership, so have the option. And then, in addition to that, once after the initial tenancy, there'll be that same benefit will be provided for those 90 households that don't take a parking space. There'll be transit information displayed in the building and distributed to tenants. The parking cost will be unbundled from the units, and then there'll also be the annual report to the county about the TDM activities on site, and there'll be ongoing contribution to support ongoing monitoring of the TDM program. This is the one level of parking. There's 96 spaces as this is drawn. Excuse me, 20 of those would be dedicated to the Legion. 76 of those would be for the residential portion of the project. That 76 results in a ratio of 0.475, but as mentioned by staff, and I think staff did a great job of going through the parking, so I'll try not to repeat that too much, but I think it's certainly worth repeating. We're asking for flexibility to go down to a 0.43 ratio. One of the things that we did look at, and I think as staff, as Peter's presentation talked about, a lot of the guidance that we were looking at for parking, while we are not in the residential parking study guidelines, we are literally across the street. And so when you look at that guidance from that document, that would say that if we were across the street and this is a market building, we'd be looking at a ratio of 0.3. If it's affordable, we'd be somewhere in the range of a 0.15 to a 0.21. We think that the parking ratio is consistent with the master transportation plan and the affordable housing plan and the community energy plan. I think we talked a little bit about the flexibility already. But one of the things we also did was look at APA's portfolio of existing properties and looked at what is the parking that's provided at some of these properties. Well, actually, we looked at the whole portfolio. But what we did is we narrowed it down to those that we thought were most comparable in terms of their access to transit and overall transportation amenities. What you see on this chart is when you look at the 5 sites that we think are the most comparable, you look at the ratio of what's actually supplied, and that's just a straight average of 0.79. But what is most important to us is really what is actually being utilized. And so when we looked at these 5 sites, the ratio that's actually being utilized is a 0.51. These are sites that most of them don't have transportation and management plans today, and I would also argue that are probably somewhat, I guess you could almost say overparked, because if you look at the utilization and you look at the amount of parking that's provided, none of these sites are utilizing all their parking. I think the other thing that's is really of interest, and you start to look at a pattern, is, we could get as a transportation guy, get into these things. When you start looking at the overall utilization ratios, and then you look at the ratios that are actually supplied, you start to see that there's higher utilization on those places where there's higher parking is provided, and we know that supply has a tendency to incentivize demand. So where we believe that the 0.43 that we requested is very, very in line and is appropriate for this project. I think with that, I'll turn it over.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Ted Calvarese, and I'm APA's third-party construction manager. I'm just going to take you quickly through construction plan. And what's up on the screen right now is a site. All construction traffic would be coming into the site and making right in, right out.
So, I would ask you to give a 10-second overview, and then we'll leave the rest for questions.
Sure. That's about it. The next slide is the. I'll make it that quick.
All right, we'll take the rest in questions. We have a lot of public speakers with us tonight for questions. Thank you all for your presentations. Madam Clerk, how many public speakers do we have?
We have 16 speakers.
Great. So Ms. Johnson is going to call your names in twos. As you come forward, please note that the podium does adjust. There's buttons on the right side. Please kind of, if you're second up, please come forward and sit next to our staff here as well. Madam Clerk, can you please call the first two names?
First two speakers are Tagus Karantonis, followed by John Carton.
Welcome, Mr. Karantonis.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. It's actually a great pleasure to be here. I'm testifying on behalf of the Alliance for Housing Solutions. This is a great project. This is exactly the type of projects we in Arlington have been working very, very hard to see happening in the places that under normal circumstances, if not three not very dedicated nonprofits wouldn't have worked very hard to get them accomplished, would be absolutely impossible, not in this century, not in the next century. 75% of this project will house households that are making less than 60% AMI. We will be able to say to people that we have, even if it's only eight households at 30% AMI, and then several at 50% AMI. This is a fantastic mix, and they will be close to the services that they need to get to their jobs, that they need to sustain their livelihoods, and this is also a great deliverable of this project. It's not only the quarter mile to Virginia station, to the metro station. We look forward to better bus service, by the way, and that's important. The 62 and the 42, that's also very close, goes to the Pentagon. That's very important for veterans. And the 38B, we're looking forward to have even better service. But for this service, we need the riders, and the riders will be brought. 160 households will be using these services, and that's extremely important. Having said that, we know very well that parking is a challenge, but this project actually delivers more than the minimum provided in the corridor. The property across the street would have to deliver less parking. And I think it's really very logical to extend the insights and the goals of the parking study for the Rosslyn-Boston corridor to this site, and to what comes with this site later with the redevelopment of the YMCA. More than that, the site needs to be seen also as good urbanism. It is a part of Arlington today in the westbound extension of the Clarendon axis that is beginning now to redevelop along and around the transportation options that are given there. This is an amazing time for that. It's everything that will happen in this triangular footprint between, to the north, Washington Boulevard, and the south, Wilson, and even, Irving to a certain degree. This will be new urbanism. Arlington has just gotten the Fairfax Drive rights. This will create an environment where these households will thrive. They will find jobs there. And today, if you walk in the night, the SRA building, there is some mixed use there that is pretty languishing, and we need the additional density to make it happen. So it's not only affordable housing. It's one of these cases where supporting affordable housing, supporting a good project, is also helping to create an urbanism that will serve the entire neighborhood and all other uses that are surrounding the site. Therefore, we ask you to support the project as we support it, and we hope that this will go well and very fast to serve the people that it is meant to serve. Most of them are veterans, and I believe that you know very well that it's not very easy to house veterans in the metropolitan region, and especially in downtown Arlington. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Karantonis.
Our next speaker is John Carting, followed by D. Taylor Reach.
Good evening. My name is John Carton. I'm president of the Lion Village Citizens Association. Lion Village in general supports this site plan, and we note that one of the members of our executive committee represented us at the site plan meetings. However, there are several matters that we'd like to bring to your attention. First, this is the first of several projects along this section of Washington Boulevard. Washington Boulevard is a major arterial street, a bus route, an alternative to Fairfax Drive and Wilson Boulevard. This is an opportunity to ensure that the lane widths on Washington Boulevard meet the county standards for arterial streets and are sufficient to safely accommodate school buses, ART and Metro buses, trucks, and other vehicle traffic. Trucks and buses are 10 feet wide. Therefore, a curb lane should be at least 11 feet wide, and inner lanes should be at least 10 feet wide. The plans show that the lanes are less than these widths. Narrower lanes will slow the movement of buses in particular, provide less room and no margin of safety for alternative forms of transportation that now share the road, such as bicycles and scooters, and can have an effect on the diverting traffic into residential neighborhoods during peak travel times. Parking lanes need to be 8 feet wide to accommodate SUVs and small trucks so that parked vehicles do not encroach on travel lanes and also allow drivers to safely exit their vehicles. We are adding a lot of density to this location and building for the future, and it's important that we get it right. Now, we're assuming that the UPS and FedEx deliveries will be made at the entrance off of Washington Boulevard and not try to use the pull-off area. Second, this is largely an affordable residential building, which is good, and we understand that it will welcome military families in particular. And we expect that a number of these families will include a family member with disabilities, possibly from military service, and who may need special vehicles to meet their transportation needs. It's important that the garage entrance and portions of the garage have a ceiling height that will accommodate vans and similar vehicles to meet these needs. It's not clear to us from the plan that this is provided for. Third, we share the concern of Ballston, Virginia Square about the adequacy of parking in the building. At a parking ratio of only 0.43 per unit, it seems unlikely that the garage will meet the needs of residents without resulting in overflow onto adjoining neighborhood streets. We note that a recent parking survey for the views at Clarendon, that is the Clarendon Baptist Church site, shows tenant parking usage at 0.82 spaces per unit in that building. And it consists largely of affordable units and is almost on top of the Clarendon Metro entrance and close to a lot of bus service. Fourth, we understand the American Legion at some time, possibly in the future, a successor organization will retain space in the building as well as access to a number of parking spaces. It would be helpful if the site conditions were to address and limit the likely usage of that space to ensure that it cannot become a venue for large events which could adversely affect the quiet enjoyment of people in the apartments and also cause an overflow of parked cars into adjacent residential streets. Finally, in general, we also share a number of additional concerns reflected in the Ballston, Virginia Square Civic Association letter of February 7th, 2019, including building height and neighborhood impact, and we hope that the Commission is able to address these issues. Thank you for your attention tonight.
Thank you.
Mr. Reach is followed by Bob Romano.
Welcome.
Hi there. Thank you all so much for this tonight, and it's an honor to get to speak. My name's David Taylor Rich, call me Taylor, and I grew up here in Arlington. And I just want to speak and show my support as a citizen for this project. I think this is the kind of project that makes me proud to say that I live in Arlington, seeing the kind of good that the county is able to accomplish. I want to talk particularly about parking. I think that if I got anything out of the information that was provided here, it's that too much space is being provided to parking in this project. You looked at the Park Roslyn example. It used about this ratio of parking without any transportation demand management and without thinking about the new mobility technologies that we're going to be seeing in the next 10, 20 years, including autonomous vehicles. Soon, maybe no one will need parking at all, and we need to be thinking about that in planning. The only other thing I wanted to mention is benches. I didn't see any benches in the sketches up there, and I think that would be a really important addition to the sort of urban environment that this is hoping to create. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Mr. Rich.
Bob Romano is followed by Tad Langer.
Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Bob Romano. I'm the commander of American Legion Post 139. As you can probably tell by my accent, I'm not a native to Arlington. My wife and I moved here 10 years ago from Wakefield, Massachusetts, in order to be here closer to our children and grandchildren. I joined the American Legion 40 years ago after leaving the Army. In addition to being the commander, I am also the American Legion baseball coach, starting in Massachusetts in 1987, and have been the Arlington coach for the last 8 years. Post 139 has been a part of Arlington since its founding in 1921. We've been at our current site since 1936, when we purchased a bungalow and made it our post home. In 1959, the old post was torn down and the current two-story structure was built. Our post had hundreds of Arlington residents as members. Our facility is really no longer viable. The building is old. It doesn't have the kinds of spaces that young vets want and need. Over the past several years, our post has gotten a fair number of inquiries from developers about the land. Some wanted to do townhouses, some wanted to do small apartment buildings. None of them wanted to accommodate a new post for us on the site. None of those proposals would have been service to the community. In the Legion, at the Legion, we take that seriously. When we started talking with APA, we stated up front that part of the deal would be a more modern facility on site to serve the vets of today and the future. They were fine with that. And we are happy that not only will our site now have affordable housing for the community, it will also have veterans' preference. Well, more modern, our new post home will be smaller. Right now, we roughly have 12,000 square feet on 2 floors. In the new project, we will have roughly 6,000 square feet on the ground floor. The interior design of our new post is not yet completed. However, we are planning on a lounge area, as well as a place for casual use of laptops, office space, some small gathering spaces, as well as larger areas that can be divided into smaller spaces. The larger area will be a fourth of the size of the one we have now. Like other American Legion posts around the country, in the past, we have rented out our second-floor hall for various group functions and family functions. Over the past few years, we have drastically cut down our outside rentals and have not rented to any group or individual for a large gathering other than the once-a-year meeting of the Montana State Society in our own receptions, Memorial Day and Veterans Day. We continue to adhere to the Legion tenets that include support for our veterans and their families, programs for youth, including Boys State, Boys Nation, and American Legion Baseball. We will be making our posts available to veterans organizations and other groups that serve veterans, like the MVets from George Mason University. Back in November, MVets used our post to meet with vets and first responders to do wills and powers of attorney for them for free. It was a very popular event, and we want to do more of these types of things. We hope to provide other services as well to assist veterans and their families, as well as the community at large. For example, suicide is a huge issue among veterans today, and we want to be able to hold functions and lectures about suicide prevention and how we can all listen better to each other. In the new development, the post will no longer have large outdoor space, and what outdoor space we do have access to will be on the east side of the building, away from the single-family residential neighbors. We will also not have a surface parking lot. All of the parking for the post will be underground, in the garage, and will be accessible by elevator. It is our intent to serve the veterans of today and the future, and to have our post provide services to the community as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Ted Unger is followed by Collier Cook.
Mr. Lunger?
Okay, good evening, Chairman Schroll and members of the Commission. My name is Tad Lunger. I'm an attorney with McGuire Woods, here on behalf of the Arlington YMCA, the central property owner in the Kirkwood study. To bring the Commission up to speed about where we are in our process, we do have an RFP out in the market and are currently evaluating proposals. There's been a lot of interest in the market for this project, and while it may be several months before the Y submits preliminary design concepts, the RFP process has provided clarity to many aspects of our project at this stage of our process. Our project will include a brand new Y to serve the entire Arlington community. First, I'd like to articulate our support of achieving affordable housing in the Virginia Square and Clarendon neighborhoods. There's a very rare opportunity to find a new site to actually increase the number of ADUs in these very competitive real estate submarkets, and this opportunity should not be missed. The Y supports APA's mission here, which also brings a new home for the Legion Post 139. We would also like to articulate our support for the flexible interpretations given thus far to the suggestions made in the Kirkwood study when applied to APA's site plan application. There are a few items that need to be addressed tonight relating to the plan. These issues are mostly applicable to the evolution of the east-west connections through APA's property, our property, and 11th Street's property, which is cumulatively the whole block. The reason we raise these issues tonight is to try and ensure that the overall goals of the Kirkwood study are achieved. These issues should be coordinated and resolved by all three property owners and county staff as each individual site plan application is evaluated so that no singular property owner is unduly burdened. Next slide. As you can see from the circulation map, the suggested vehicular, pedestrian, and bicycle transportation system options for the block are articulated visually, and the notes provide considerable flexibility in the ultimate coordinated design of this network of connections. Next slide. As you can see from the building form map, consistent with the suggestions made on the circulation map, there is a central east-west connection generally located mid-block. As you can also see, shifting the location of this segment north, if it were to be a vehicular route, will be located within and take away from open space planned in the Kirkwood study, and would forego the opportunity to expand that open space by acquiring the last remaining single-family home east of Kansas Street if that were something that property owner would want to do. Next slide. As you can see from Exhibit A, the first two site plan application design processes have impacted the options for east-west connectivity. APA, justifiably, in order to utilize the northern portion of its site to create enough affordable housing to be competitive and to have a successful housing project, has requested to place a majority of the western road segment north of 12th Road onto the Wise property. A 30-foot depth of a potentially 50-foot wide road is now located in an area for planned open space on the Wise property, and construction of 40 feet of that potentially 50-foot wide road has been shifted to the YMCA, including costs for constructing portions of the road located on APA's property. On the other side of the block, 11th Street Development, in order to move their project forward at a reasonable pace, has requested to shift the eastern road segment south, the result being that these two road segments no longer align. In fact, with the topography and the significant change in direction required to connect these two segments, it may now be that these two segments have to be joined via a bicycle and pedestrian network rather than a full vehicular travelway. One of the stated primary goals of the Washington Kirkwood study is to, quote, encourage the redevelopment of existing but aging semi-public community facilities. As we stated previously, we do support the liberal and flexible interpretation of the Kirkwood study recommendations and the flexible application to the first two site plans. And we do ask that the same flexibility be afforded to the YMCA when it has to design around a situation it did not create. So the Y is asked, therefore, that you acknowledge in your report to the County Board the concerns the Y has raised about being able to provide a two-way vehicular access between the two proposed road segment locations, and in the event that such a roadway is required in the future, we ask the Planning Commission to recommend that APA and the Y share equally in land and construction cost contributions and have this assurance made part of APA's and the Y site plan conditions. Our other equitable interests are outlined in our letter to you for the record, and we hope you make these requests part of your discussion tonight. Thank you, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have this evening.
Collier Cook is followed by Henry Staples.
Good evening, Commissioners, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. I'm Collier Cook. I'm the president of the Boston Virginia Square Civic Association, although I want to note that Mr. Henry Staples, who's up next, will be speaking on behalf of the association. But I'd like to spend a few minutes with you to express my observations of this process and where we are right now. As you may be aware, this part of our neighborhood, north of Washington Boulevard, commonly referred to as Quincy Park North, has seen little change over the years. For instance, Chairman Schroll, when you were president of our Civic Association, I don't recall any projects in this area, nor I was going to refer to Commissioner Iacomini, but she's not here tonight. When she was in our neighborhood, there was a townhouse project that got nixed and replaced with a single-family house project, and that's been it for about the last 20 years or so. So this is the very first project in a very long time, and the first one within this Club Plus study area. This is setting the tone on how future projects in this area will be approached. Because of that, I would say our collective mood right now as neighbors is anxious. They're anxious that the parking plan, even with its incentives for alternative transportation choices, will actually work and not cause overflow parking on neighborhood streets. They're anxious that the RPP program that provides some protections today won't be gutted in the future. They're anxious that the fire marshal won't call for changes to 12th Road by eliminating street parking to make it easier for the emergency equipment to egress this site. They're anxious that the transportation provisions provided for the future adjoining YMCA redevelopment will truly be both appropriate and sufficient for the YMCA's needs. They're anxious that the overhyped building won't seem to loom over the nearby homes. So I plead to you to listen to the comments of our neighbors and the ideas they'll be bringing to you. The goals of this project are laudable and provides a true community service. For that, the applicant should be commended. But there are real impacts to the neighbors. The adjustments made to this project as a part of the review process has improved it, and I thank the applicant for those. But more can and should be done. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr.
Cool. Okay, thank you. Thank you for, I'm Henry Staples, and thank you for letting me participate in the SPRC process and conversations in and around it. And so I'm just going to cut to the chase on a couple of these points that we put out in our letter on Thursday. You know, everybody feels like Apple's coming in. We're going to welcome into the neighborhood. And so it really boils down to two things for us, for the nearest neighbors to protect and preserve the 12th Road, Kansas Street area, and for the whole parking situation. And so for protecting and preserving, we want to we still keep on requesting, can you get those ladder trucks out the Y way through a temporary egress instead of going down 12th Road, because we really feel like the parking is going to be lost over on 12th Road because of that. And for protecting and preserving that area, there are some movements with the shared street part of it, and you'll notice in the latest drawings how they have the paver patterning on the top half of it north of the garage. And we're just asking, instead of just making it that pattern, to instead stop the traffic at the garage and only allow the fire trucks up above that. And that would include also removing the one parking space up above there. We feel like if that spot stays open, that'll become the shared services, Uber, hangout, turnaround area up there. And it'll diminish the idea of that shared street. So those are those three with it. We also ask, when it comes down to this parking, the numbers are off, and so please put in that request for the RPP to initiate their study on the 12th Road in Kansas or into the area larger than that to increase the zone hours and see if it's warranted to it. We know that the program is off now, but if they can initiate that request and then just, if they approve it, apply it when they're back on. For the 12th Road impacts and the proposed mitigations, we want to, it's still, we feel like the headlights, the drawings they're showing you don't represent how far a headlight actually shines. It shines a minimum of 160 feet, and so it will be hitting those two houses. And so we're hoping there's some sort of mitigation, either with planters or something, something to take that pressure off of the two houses there. We also want to make sure, as it is, that if there's any egress, if it can go out the Y, we will take the smaller fire trucks out and they can go out there. We talked to the fire marshal about that, and we'd be okay as a secondary egress of using the bollard design as it's designed now. And then we come to the parking. So in the back of our handout here, we took apart what they presented as that and showed what could be more applicable properties to it. Two of those were there, and then we added on the Jordan, as you just heard, I call it the V-point, but the one at Clarendon. And they all show a right around a 0.7 utilization. And so to us, it feels like it's a foregone conclusion that they're under providing parking at this point. And the question is not, are they providing it? It's to what extent are they not providing it? And is that okay? And so from the guideline just itself, it's $50,000 a spot that you're giving up on development. There's 90 spots from the guideline that you're giving up, $4.5 million sitting there. They're providing 70 and not providing 90. So there's $4.5 million left on the table. What are we going to do? They're going to, right now they're saying for those 90 properties, we'll give $5,800 a year, $65 per tenant to do something with it. But what we're saying is, if you don't want to provide the parking spots for those that would be used, maybe modernized, consider incentivizing to a point that you can reach that 0.38 demand utilization. And it's probably a larger number. I don't know what that is. It might need a study or something, but we're looking at, you know, maybe a couple $100 per unit to get them to change their mind about needing that car, and that takes the pressure off the neighborhood and also on the citizens within that building. And finally, quickly, we want to have a conversation with the American Legion about their usage. There has been some issues before, and we just want to have that conversation before they start, get something down in writing on how they're going to use the space. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Staples.
Nikki Toner is followed by Dan Donahue.
Welcome, Ms. Toner.
Thank you. Hi, good evening. My name is Nikki Toner. I'm a resident and homeowner on 12th Road. Just want to say I am not opposed to development. Just want to make sure that this project works for our small community on our quaint little street. Some concerns I have are the emergency egress. Access via the YMCA seems like a more logical and less disruptive solution. 12th Road is so narrow that potential for future removal of parking on one side is possible. Parking is very limited as it is. Connectivity between APA and 12th Road. The temporary solution with bollards and chain are not ideal. I would like to see it redeveloped into something more visually appealing after alleys are connected and the emergency egress can go away. Increase in traffic, both pedestrian and vehicular. 12th Road is the closest and most immediate access from the neighborhood to the project, which will result in increased parking on the street via residences, guests of the residences, visitors to the American Legion, and the construction crew. The parking restrictions are currently Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. Can hours be increased so that homeowners can park when they return home from work? Current condition and possible upgrades for 12th Road. 12th Road is already a mess, even before additional pedestrian, bike, scooter traffic is added. There currently are no sidewalks. There's poor lighting, especially on Kansas, where there are no streetlights, and poor drainage and sloping, which caused a really big mud pit, as I like to refer to it, that's not going to go away without some maintenance and repairs. Upgrades need to be made. Does this mean adding curb and gutter, or possibly sidewalks to one side, or additional streetlights? It's difficult to understand what improvements would be best at this point, but we need to have a partnership with Arlington County to help figure out what options may be best for future use of the road. Safety on the street is also a concern. My impression is that these street improvements should be part of the cost of the APA development or spread between all projects included in the GLEP study. If left in the hands of the residences to be addressed via neighborhood conservation improvements, the likelihood of it being fixed are quite low or could take many years. Please consider these street improvements as a community give back for all the years of noise and inconvenience we will live through over the next 10+ years. This is just the first of 3 major developments within one block that butts up to our neighborhood. Please be considerate of your existing neighbors and make this a win-win for all involved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dan Donahue is followed by James Peoples.
Good evening. My name is Dan Donahue, and I am an officer at the American Legion Post 139, and I've been a member there for more than 30 years. I moved to Arlington in 1964 after being discharged from the Marines and raised my family here. Through our partnership with APA, we will have a new facility that will continue to support the older veteran and serve our new comrades as well. We will also have the opportunity to have our large lot provide housing that will benefit veterans and the broader community. Over time, our transportation needs and aspirations have changed. Back when I was first looking for a house in the 60s, the realtor showed us one out in Manassas and cheerfully said we could zip in and zip out on 66. Well, so much for zipping. But now as a county, we're trying to de-emphasize car use, and that's a good thing. Currently, there is no connection across our block from 13th Street North to Washington Boulevard, and there should be one. That's why I support that the proposed north-south connection, as well as the proposed east-west connection, be constructed. Pedestrians, cyclists, scooters, fire trucks if needed, and not for through automobile traffic. I very much appreciate the Transportation Commission's recommendation of the shared street topology. I think we should go a step further, so to speak, and make the connection a pedestrian priority designation. Both typologies are in the master transportation plan. To the best of my knowledge, a pedestrian priority street has not yet been constructed in Arlington. However, there is one called for in the adopted update to the courthouse sector plan. A portion of North Yule Street is designated as a promenade that extends from the square to Clarendon Boulevard. And according to the adopted Crystal City sector plan, large blocks there are proposed to be broken up by pedestrian concourses. I know portions of the thoroughfares proposed for our block need to carry some loading traffic for new buildings as well as vehicles to their garages. That should be it. We can dedicate space that would accommodate a small neighborhood street, but we should construct them to act as fire lanes and for pedestrians and cyclists and not cars. The George Mason block immediately to our south across Washington Boulevard will never have an automobile street through it. So any through street on our block will never connect to anything but 13th Street. And the route of such a street on our block is going to be circuitous at best. Traffic should be directed onto the arterial streets, not the neighborhood streets. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Donahue.
James Peoples is followed by Kathy Lash.
Welcome, Mr. Peoples.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm the owner of the little house that he was talking about on 12th Road. I supported the GLUB study, but I'm disappointed in the way it's being implemented. I think that we, the neighbors, are being sacrificed on the altar of a supposed greater good. I grew up in abject poverty, and I spent my time in combat. So I support those goals. But I wish that our neighborhoods was more considered. Most of the houses in the neighborhood, including mine, were built 100 years ago as part of the original Ball development. And I've owned it for 40 years. A historic neighborhood like this needs to be better preserved than what I see is happening with the GLUB implementation. This building and its uses will overwhelm, as many people said, 12th Road. It's huge, and it's not exactly architecturally appropriate for the site. Too late to change it, but I want to make that comment for future planning. The pedestrian access proposed on 12th Road services nothing other than the building. We will not use it. Where are we going to go? There's nothing down there for us to go to. They will come to us and use our street for parking. So our parking situation needs to be considered. My house sits 1 foot from the right-of-way. I looked at the study the fire marshal did for the turn radius to get out onto 12th Road. He'll hit our house. It will take a very skilled driver to miss the house and make that turn. I don't know whether or not they have very skilled drivers. I assume they have pretty good drivers, but it's a risk. Lastly, the proposal to dedicate the street is a flawed one. I have talked to the planning gentleman here about the setbacks. The setback from public street is 25 feet. Our lots are 50 feet wide. So if there's a 25-foot setback, particularly on this house across the street from me, it takes up half of his property. Plus, he's got frontage on 12th Road for a 25-foot setback. So now that's another 25% of his lot. And then he's got the setback on the residential side. So therefore, he's got a slice down the middle of it. I don't know whether my interpretation of the setback rules are correct, but that's a problem. On my side, it hasn't happened yet, but the Y is going to try to do something with the shared street through there, and it will impact I'll have a road on 3 sides of my property if this thing goes forward. That needs to be considered. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peoples.
Kathy Lash is followed by Kara Trout.
Hi, thank you. I just have a couple questions, just listening through this, so I'll just ask them. Let's see, can a tenant agree, someone who moves into the building, can they agree to only have 1 car in riding? I mean, is that something that can be done? I don't know. It's a question. I think the $65 amount that was mentioned for the smart cards is just an absurd amount. If you divide it out by 365 days, it's nothing, basically. And if you have 3-bedroom apartments, is it per person occupant? Is it for the, I don't know, it's just an absurd amount, I think. Okay, then I have a question about this site. I think it said it was increasing the density by 9.5%. So are the other sites also going to have increased density? I don't know. But if they are, the parking does become a serious issue. And my question is, can the houses around these type of developments get reduced coverage for their land so they can park more cars on their own property? I mean, the parking is a situation despite, the new modes of transportation and everything. I think probably everybody in here drove here and probably will drive home. So it's just a question of how we can make things work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cara Trout is followed by Catherine Darling.
Hi. My name is Kara Troop, and I'm here on behalf of the Lynbrook Association. My colleague, Goose Bossman, was on the SPRC and is unable to be here tonight, so I'm speaking on his behalf as well as my neighbors. First, I'd like to talk about the plan and the few of the points that we wanted to highlight. First, we applaud the applicant for contributing part of their parcel to the east-west connection. It's important to us, given the potential YMCA and sport and health redevelopment and the huge increase in residents in and around that area. The Y alone has stated in presentations to us as neighbors prior to the GLUP process that they hope to have 3 times as many members. That's a lot of trips, and they need to be able to go somewhere. And it's our preference that it not be through the neighborhood. So we view the east-west connection as a way to help ease the already cut-through traffic that occurs on 13th Street. So we applaud the applicant for contributing their, setting aside land for that usage at a future date. Second, we appreciate that APA moved the parking garage entrance after the first SPRC meeting, as this move alleviates some of the impacts on our neighbors of 12th North Road. Not all of them, but some of them, and we appreciated that they were willing to do this. Third, although the building is in line with the GLUP maximum stories, it's above the height maximum of 80 feet, and that's a concern for us as we move to other projects. And I hope I'll speak about that in a little bit. Finally, we're concerned about the proposed parking ratio. We believe it's too low for the number of building residents, especially given the number of 2- and 3-bedroom units planned. We believe it will also lead to overflow parking in the neighborhood, where street parking is already at a premium. As we raised during the SPRC meeting, residential parking is only through 5, and even with that, I've seen FDIC workers who park in the neighborhood currently because there's almost no enforcement. And we are worried that that will continue and only be increased when you have more people in and around the neighborhood. In terms of the process, many of us were involved in the GLUP Plus study. We're trying, and we are welcoming of these new neighbors as these properties get built. But it also has to be sort of amenable and workable for everyone. So there's some concerns that we have and that we raised in that GLUP process, and that as we go through these site plans, we have concerns about. During that study, we talked about a lot of different things that are important to us, and they resulted in guiding principles, particularly when considering height of building. The Civic Association at the time asked for 70 feet cap. You guys went with 80 feet. Now we're at 82.6 for this property. That's a concern. It's only it's only 2 over, but it's still 2 over for those people whose residences are right there. So we would ask that that be considered, and that as you get new site plans, you consider the height limitations and the 7-story limitations. The 7 stories was an amendment that was made during the GLUP Plus approval process. And during the conversation, this body stated that the property owners who wanted to achieve approval of 7 stories, and this is a quote, need to meet not only the GLUP, but they also need to meet stretch goals. This plan obviously does bring more, given the provision of affordable housing and the retention of the American Legion, but we're concerned by recent site plan filings where the 7-story height is being requested without meeting these stretch goals. And we would hope that you would honor the intent and the established principles in the GLUP that we all spent so much time and energy codifying. As a community, we worked in good faith with you all in the development of those principles. I think everyone had to compromise in getting to those principles. And so we're looking for you as a committee to reward our good faith and honor those commitments of the GLUP Plus study and apply them equitably. Thank you.
Thank you.
Catherine Darling is followed by Oprah Wilcox.
Welcome, Ms. Darling.
Hi, thank you for taking the time to listen to me tonight. Sorry, I have a bit of a cough, so my voice is weird.
I think I do too.
I'm an Arlington resident. My family moved here about 4 years ago, and I actually got my first apartment in Boston. So I'm familiar with this area, and I live pretty close to it. So I want to share with you something that actually happened to me the first night I moved to Boston. We were going to the grocery store to get dinner. It was January. It was cold. It was snowing, and there was a homeless gentleman who was warming his hands over the shelves where they keep the rotisserie chickens. And that's really an image that has stuck with me. And living in Arlington has exposed me to dramatic contrasts of wealth and poverty that I just didn't see growing up. And that's why I'm here today, and that's why I want to express my strong support for this project. So the American Legion project is an absolutely fantastic collaboration, and it's going to turn an aging and underutilized building into something that can truly change the lives of veterans. It's centrally located, which means it can act as a springboard to connect these people to jobs and opportunities that they would not otherwise have access to, and that's incredibly important. I've also experienced myself living in Boston that I started walking to get groceries. Public transportation is really easy and accessible, so I think that this project will be able to fully take advantage of that. The veterans who will live at the American Legion served our country, and this is our chance to pay them back. It's on all of us here today to create positive change in our communities, and this is how we do it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oprah Wilcox is followed by Mara Myers.
Welcome.
Hello. She's here to support me because I'm a little nervous.
That's fine.
My name is Oprah Wilcox. I'm on Apple property. I live at the Springs apartment. It is the best thing that ever happened to me in my life. I'm 46 years old. It's my first place I've ever had. I'm on disability. Thank God for affordable housing. And I support it because people like me need it. Because if it wasn't for affordable housing, I couldn't afford nowhere to live. I was homeless for like 15 years before I went there. So this is my home. I love it, and I encourage it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wilcox.
Mara Myers is our last speaker.
Welcome, Ms.
Hi.
Myers.
Thanks very much for all your service. So I live on 14th Street. I'm one of the neighbors. It's a little bit farther away, but pretty close enough. And I wanted to tell you things I'm glad about and a few things I'm disappointed about, and just my overall impressions of where we are with the GLUP Plus study. So the things I'm glad to see, one is that APA keeps open the option for the east-west vehicle connection, and that's very important to the neighborhood. I'd like to state that I think that the impression, the statement from the McGuire Woods lawyers that there was an impression that the residential neighbors to the west do not support vehicle east-west connection all the way along the block is something that I don't think that I would say is not correct from anything that I've heard. I think that there is a lot of support for Kirkwood over to entering on Kirkwood, exiting on Washington Boulevard. So I would say explore that a little bit more because I think that's what you'll find. And secondly, I want to state that APA and the American Legion have been very open to communications with the neighborhood, so we appreciate that. Things I'm disappointed about would be the parking impact on the neighborhood, which is high with such a low ratio. The effects on 12th Road, as have been stated, it's a very narrow road. And separately, I'm concerned about the YMCA and 11th Street developments and keeping their commitments on that east-west connection. And finally, general impressions about where we are with the GLUP Plus study. So I have a concern that the three main applicants approach the GLUP Plus study with an appeal for the whole study area, but that the individual applicants will seek more and more modifications, and that will chip away at the broader intent that you, the Planning Commission, set forth. And I kindly request that you keep this in mind as the individual applicants approach you with modifications and exceptions, especially those that will have detrimental effects on the existing neighborhood. And we hope that all three applicants honor what you have set out already. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Meyer. So, Madam Clerk, that was our last speaker?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, the matter is now with the Commission. I want to go now to Commissioner Lentelmi for a report from the Transportation Commission.
Thank you, Chairman Schroll. This was discussed last week at the Transportation Commission meeting. We covered pretty much 3 areas, 2 and more in depth. There was, of course, a discussion on parking. Overall, the Commission was comfortable with the ratios that were given, that are being recommended by the applicant here, and that's given the data from other housing APA projects, and also from our knowledge of the usage of parking within the corridor itself. We feel that the parking ratios here are appropriate. We did raise for discussion why this nonprofit affordable housing project will be contributing to the ACCS, $6,000, almost $7,000 a year for quite a number of years. We were wondering, is that the best use of money? Does that increase their costs? It was just a discussion. It didn't go anywhere, but I did want to raise that it was something we were questioning. Circulation did take a large part of our discussion. We were okay with the 12th Street barrier, that it being a chain that could be bollard and chains that will be removed by the fire department as needed. We did explore whether that bollard and chain could be moved down onto Kansas Street toward the parking garage. We were told that the fire department had nixed that the fire department wants to be able to pull onto the full axis of Kansas Street next to the building coming into a potential call rather than having to unlock at the end. They don't want to be slowed down by having to unlock the chain coming in. So that's why the barrier is at 12th Street rather than on Kansas. We were also comfortable with the barrier as being a temporary use until the east-west right-of-way is fully built out for fire department access. The thought is that once, should there be a full east-west access that the fire department could get its trucks through, that at that point the barrier could be made more permanent along 12th, to North 12th Street. We did have a lot of discussion about the typology characteristics of the proposed North Kansas Street. And we ended up disagreeing with it being an urban center local for part of it and a shared street for the rest. In fact, an amendment was offered, which was seconded and was approved as part of the overall resolution at the end, which was voted on, by the way, 9-1 in favor of this project and the changes to the MTP. We felt that it's appropriate for this to be a shared street from the traffic light all the way up to the end of it. We were not persuaded by the idea that there is a traffic light there. I will note that, well, I guess that part of our discussion we could do that since it didn't come at Transportation Commission, but we did end up voting with an amendment to have the entire North Kansas Street be a shared street as opposed to having a split typology. And that's the Transportation Commission report.
Thank you. Before I turn to Commissioner Hughes, are there any other commissions here? I don't think so that heard this. Okay. Commissioner Hughes was our SPRC chair. I'd like to turn it over to you for your report.
Thank you, Commissioner Schroll. Good evening, my fellow commissioners, and I first want to thank many of you. I think almost all of you made at least one of our SPRCs, meaning our new commissioners, I know, weren't yet commissioners, so so thank each of you. I'll be brief. We did a great job here. I also want to take a moment real quickly right off the bat to thank the neighbors here, specifically Mr. Bossman and Mr. Staples, for representing their neighbors well in a very challenging conversation, and specifically as the president of the Civic, Boston, Virginia Civic Squares, Mr. Collier, pointed out, a conversation that has not been a frequent one in that area, and probably since Lynbrook Townhomes in the late 60s, probably would have been the last one. So, but with that, I do want to sort of bring your attention to the letter and really focus our area down here. I'm going to sort of skip over the summary areas of continued deliberations. That's areas I think that have all been brought up. I'm not going to go into the questions that were asked this evening. I'm going to let each of you sort of dive in as you see fit to an area of consideration. But I do want to sort of bring down to the areas of what I do believe are some areas that we should discuss and reflect on. That's in the second area, sort of major delineations. The first group of outlines was over the site area and design, and these are things, of course, you've heard about, the 82.66 feet, how we feel about that. The vehicular connections between Kansas Street, 12th Road North, the fire emergency, and the universal bike pedestrian access there. Sort of similar to the conversation from TC, as Commissioner Lantomi pointed out. How the Commission feels about the north right-of-way. This is the east-west right-of-way along the north side of the site. Its easements and dedications, the possibilities, the creations, the future connections there, and what, if anything, we have to speak to about that. The garage exit, while not brought up too frequently this evening, remained an area of deep concern at all three of our SPRC meetings, so it would be inappropriate of me not to bring that up this evening. Parking. We are outside of the parking metro corridor study area. Technically, I think we're outside of the major planning area just by sort of a nuance of history. So how do we feel about the proposed parking on this site? The final thought, which I think is very important for us to consider, and it wasn't really talked about too much this evening, this is one of three known sites. That's the ultimate conclusion. And one of the things that I hope to as SPR chair, and I try to sort of leave as a golden tenet, is do no harm. To make sure that Commissioner Lantomi with 11th Street and whichever commissioner serves as the YMCA chair has as many possibilities in front of them as possible. And so that was sort of the guiding light goal. And I hope that I've achieved that, but if not, I do want to know. And the final thing I do want to mention, because I think it's incredible, and I know the applicant spoke about it briefly, and so one of our speakers did. I just want to draw it to your attention. This is incredible because of the number of 50% AMI units we're receiving. Frequently, in our committed affordable units, we have been seeing 60% AMI units. And in this building, we are going to, with the income averaging, see units at 50%, and many of them will be in the two-bedroom category, which is an astonishing achievement in my mind. So with that, I'm going to be quiet, hopefully, unless my fellow commissioners have questions for me until final comments.
All right. So thank you, Commissioner Hughes, for your efforts, and also Commissioner Morton, who is kind of shadowing you through this site plan. Thank you for your work as well, and very good summary of the process. To Commissioner Hughes's outline, I want to add construction phasing, because I did cut off the gentleman during his presentation, and I also want to cover the MTP amendments as well. And so I want to open up to other commissioners if they have other items that they would like to add to our discussion outline. Commissioner Gearin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for an excellent report and presentation. I would like to add discussion about tree canopy and vegetation.
All right, tree canopy and vegetation. Others? Oh, yes, Commissioner Morton.
This may be the same issue, but I'd like to discuss the buffering on the western side.
We'll have kind of a landscape section. We'll include that, both of those items. All right, others? All right, we can always have a catch-all at the end if people think we missed something. All right, let's start with, on Commissioner Hughes's outline here with site area and design. So, floor is open for questions. Staff. Yes, Commissioner McSweeney.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and jump right into that first question here because we heard several speakers talk about it, and that is the height proposal. This is going a little above the 80-foot height, and I think it's probably worth the conversation, especially since we do have two other site plans that will be coming in about why we think, if we think, that this should be approved in this instance, and why we think it should be approved in this instance. So I guess my question is really to my fellow commissioners, do you have a sense of this? Because it is above the amount for the GLUT Plus.
So I do want to get into that, and we should circle back to kind of discussion amongst yourselves. But I would like to start sort of with questions for the applicant and for staff, but I would certainly like to kind of come back to that question you're posing. So let's kind of table that for the moment. We'll certainly come back to it. Commissioner Steinberger.
So I did have that similar question, but my question I think really is for staff and the applicant. What is that extra 2.5 feet doing or getting for the rest of the property? If that could be kind of spelled out, that would be helpful.
Yeah, so I'm going to pass it off to the applicant, if Ms. Romero or Mr. Atkinson, if you want to address what the extra 2 feet.
Related on that?
What's that?
I related on the 2 feet, would add to that, a question for that they could then answer.
Also answer? Yes, Commissioner Lentemi.
One of the people testifying did ask whether there is sufficient height in the basement garage for conversion vans. Is this, would that affect the 2.5 feet? Is there enough height within the garage that a handicap conversion van will be able to fit?
Mr. Atkinson, if you want to address that.
To answer your question first, we're required by code to have a minimum clearance of 96 inches, which accommodates the handicap vans. And I'm not totally sure how we're doing on this one. We're either doing it for the entire garage or we'll lower the slab for a certain portion of it. But we do have to accommodate that. That's an ADA thing, and we don't want to run afoul of that at all.
Commissioner Lentemi.
No, it's not reflecting the extra 2 feet. It starts at grade, and the real reason, a couple of reasons for the extra feet, I think it was alluded to by Peter, was that one, so we can keep the ramp, because there's impacts on the steepness of the ramp. So if we went steeper, we could maybe lower it a little bit if we went steeper on the ramp, but that wouldn't be a really very desirable thing because, the steeper the ramp, the more the lights are going to be shining up as a car comes out. The second thing is, and I think it's more important, is that the county has minimal clearances that they have to have for trash removal. So that's 14 feet at the door, clear, so, and to have adequate space for the Legion so that 6,000 square feet feels like it should. I mean, a lot of times you look at some of the sector plans and they're asking for 18 and 20 feet floor to floor. So we're actually a little bit under that, even though the square footage of the Legion is comparable to what you'll see in a lot of the site plans in the rest of the RB corridor and in Crystal.
And could you address Commissioner Steinberger's question about what the extra 2 feet, 8 inches gets you?
Well, that's what it does do. It gets us additional access into the loading, and it also gets us the additional ceiling height for the Legion.
Yes, you may follow up, and then I'll come back to Commissioner.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think that in terms of the ramp am I to take from your statement that there's no other way to do the ramp that would keep the height at 80 feet?
We could take a look at it, but I think that what we've got is the best compromise. And actually, the stronger reason for it has to do with the loading and with the ceiling height in the Legion.
The loading
The loading for the truck loading into the building
Okay.
and for the trash pickup.
Thank you.
Anything else, Commissioner Steinberger? On this? Staff. Okay. Commissioner Siegel.
So also a question for APA. So the ground floor starts at grade and goes up 16 feet. That's the first floor. Is that correct? Am I thinking about that correctly? Close to 16. Then remind me, from the second floor and up to the 7th floor, there are then 6 floors per the residential portion, and each floor to floor or floor to ceiling measurement is what?
We have 2 levels of concrete podium because you can only do 5 levels of stick above concrete. So the second floor, the residential portion of the second floor, because it's concrete, can actually be a little bit lower and maintain a market-appropriate ceiling height.
What is the market-appropriate ceiling?
Around 9 feet.
9 feet.
Yeah, 8.6 to 9. I believe it's 9 on this one. Then once you get up into the stick built, the big difference there is where you may only have like a 6 or 8 inch slab for the concrete. For the stick built, you've got to have a truss that's maybe 12 to 16 inches deep. You know, so that raises what on concrete would be, say, roughly 10 feet floor to floor. It takes it up to around 11 or 11 feet 2 inches. So it pushes everything up. But the reason to go to the stick built is really a whole question of construction cost. You know, it's Ted Calories can tell you about that much better than I can, but it's substantial.
Great, thank you. I'll just reserve comment on that until we have our conversation, but I wanted to put those numbers on the record.
Absolutely. Commissioner McSweeney.
Thank you. If I recall correctly, I think staff, in your presentation, you made a comment that some additional height was needed because of the venting that's required for the American Legion, and was that a change or a requirement that the county placed?
Through every site plan process that has a retail or retail equivalent space, and in this case, American Legion is retail equivalent, and they have a commercial kitchen. In order to have adequate venting, they need, and space for other utilities, they need to have a taller ground floor generally than non food related businesses. As the applicant said, this is still lower than generally what we like for our require for instance, buildings on entertainment streets, the red streets in the sector plan, but they do need this extra height to accommodate this this venting. And I should point out that the extra height is at the ground floor. Even if they were to remove a top floor of the building, it would still be over the 70-foot height limit. Keep in mind that this is not a zoning modification. It is a recommendation of the sector plan. If they were to go down to 6 stories, the limit says 70 feet inclusive of. The plan did not anticipate mixed construction like this. They didn't really take into account, and also having the ceiling heights. I should also mention during the process, we did have them raise the height of their loading dock because the county board has very strongly indicated that no further modifications of our standard requirements for loading docks. So they had to make that halfway through the process in order to satisfy us and instructions as we understand them from the county board in order to not have modifications for loading docks. Couple that with the fact that they moved their driveway entrance from the lowest spot of the property, which is the rear, to the middle. It actually added a few inches in this process. And so because of those staff and community requests to move the entrance and to have a higher loading dock.
Okay, thank you. I think that was very helpful. Those 3 items together contributed to it being potentially 2 feet 8 inches higher. And just again, I just want to be very clear, the zoning itself provides for higher heights. Is that true?
The zoning in the CO 2.5 zoning district doesn't have a numerical limitation. It has stories, and it's 16 stories is the maximum height limit.
And so it was the recommendation from this commission, actually, the special GLUP study, that specified floors, not exactly heights.
It did specify, yeah.
Others on kind of site design questions? Yes, Commissioner Ricks.
I'd like to ask staff a little more clarity on the 12th Road Bollards. I've heard some of the residents talk about 12th Road being a fairly dark street, lacking street lighting. I was just wondering, what, if any, concern is there with joggers, bikers, mopeds coming down the middle of that road at night and not seeing a chain? Is there lighting, or is there some safety precaution to avoid, that unfortunate collision?
So the bollards at the end of 12th Road would receive probably more light than along the street naturally, because North Kansas Street is proposed to be lit as part of its improvements. So the lighting along North Kansas, which is directly adjacent to these bollards, would provide lighting on them to address your concern.
So the chain would be obvious to anyone moving at about 20, 25 miles an hour?
I would think that if anybody's moving at 25 miles an hour at night, they're probably in a vehicle, which should be operating with headlights. But if they are jogging and walking, they would see it with the lighting as proposed on North Kansas.
Anything else, Commissioner Ricks? Okay. Yes, Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you, Commissioner Stroll. I wanted to be quiet through this whole process, but I do want to just expand on Commissioner Rick's comment. It is my greatest regret in this entire process is that connection and how it's physically constructed. And I would welcome recommended improvements from my fellow commissioners, should any of them have any. And I may even make one myself, because I don't know what the right answer is there, but I do know that I think we could have done better than a bollard and chains there. And still respect the community's wishes for zero vehicular access, but preferred universal pedestrian and bicycle access. I heard the comments tonight from the community that began to ask about exploring possibilities for improvement along 12th Road North, which I do think are something that was not possible out of the special GLUP study, because they were so focused on the vehicular connections and ensuring their restrictions. So Commissioner Ricks, I applaud you on that line of questioning, and I would welcome any thoughts my fellow commissioners or motions would have to considering possible improvements to that possible intersection that would enhance the pedestrian bicycle connection.
I might come back to that. All right, Commissioner Siegel.
So,
sorry? Mr. Gibson, did you want to weigh in? I'll come to
Sure.
If you want to come back to it, we can do that. In our presentation to the Transportation Commission, one of the things that we brought out here is that we fully intend that as the network that area, that terminus, has a lot of opportunity. It does not have to serve fire access potentially in the future. And with that requirement removed, it certainly could become a space for a small community space, either a bench or plantings or otherwise. So I share Commissioner Hughes' long-term goals for that space. Hopefully, the plan will advance quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Commissioner Siegel, and then Commissioner Morton.
So, Mr. Gibson, you anticipated my question with an answer, so I don't have to raise the question. But the point was, the site will continue to have opportunity to redevelop, because we've yet to have the final piece come in with the Y, which is what I heard, I think, throughout your presentations. But I would ask additionally, what opportunities are there for upgrading 12th Street with sidewalks or pavers or better street lights or sidewalks? how would that happen? Through a CIP process? Mr. Viola.
So likely the way that that would occur is the NC program. It is what addresses these issues very regularly in our community. It has very established protocols for community engagement, for decision-making and advancing plans that are supported by the community. It can deliver all of the elements that have been discussed, from lighting to curb and gutter to street widening to things like that. And so we feel that that is the most appropriate mechanism. There's one other mechanism, which is the neighborhood complete streets option, but of those two, the NC program regularly has more funding.
And one more follow-up. And how would that, we haven't heard about neighborhood conservation, at least I haven't in the meetings I went to, the SPRC meetings I attended, nor this evening. What is the status of NC in this area now? And if there is nothing happening, how would that get kicked off? Normally, Civic Association comes up with a neighborhood conservation plan.
Yes, so
what do we know about that?
Well, do you want to address the current status of NC? But yes, the Civic Association would certainly nominate proposals to NC. So, but Mr. Gibson, do you want to speak to the status?
So I've spoken to our NC staff. There are no current NC projects within the Ballston, Virginia Square neighborhood. So if they were to establish that there would be no competing projects within the neighborhood, then that would be advanced writ large across the county against the NC program. And as you know, NC has received a funding cut in the last cycle. NC funding is always welcome within many of our communities, and so it is not challenged, but it is merit-based and awarded based on that program's criteria and process.
Commissioner Morton.
I have a follow-up and then another question about the fire access. So I did note on page 23 of the staff report, the discussion of the terminus of 12th Road North can be designed to better support the community. And again, I'm kind of echoing the confusion about what that might be. And would the community, would it be kind of geared toward the 12th Street neighbors, or really the residents of the APA property? Is there any even conceptual vision for how it could better serve the community?
I'm going to defer to county staff, as we are dedicating a lot of that area now to county control.
Well, it will actually be a public
Exactly,
site.
exactly.
Mr. Gibson.
It's envisioned that that would be studied as part of the Y project, because ultimately the Y would create the fire access that throughout the rest of the site that would allow that space to be reprogrammed.
Can I ask the second? Thank you. So the staff had noted on page 32, with respect to the fire access requirements on 12th Road, that after your analysis, you had concluded that the emergency vehicle requirements for the street would not change from what are otherwise required today. Are you able to articulate a little bit about what's required now, how it would change, if at all? There's some concern about parking being removed. What led you to the conclusion that there wouldn't be a significant change, or any change?
And to clarify that, it's that the requirements on 12th Road would not change. So as this project has a 26-foot clear requirement to support the mid-rise building, the new egress would not require a 26-foot clear width. It would continue to require whatever the fire department needs to support those single-family homes. It wouldn't be different than what it is today. So if this project were to not advance, if fire trucks were having issues getting down 12th Road without this project and needed parking removed, then this project wouldn't change those circumstances. And so We know that we've had multiple engagements with our community, from our community to the fire department. They're starting the investigation process to look at what those conditions are. We have a number of small, narrower streets throughout the county, and those are looked at on a case-by-case basis when fire has an issue or our trash service has issues or other issues like that. The process for that is that if the fire department thinks that there could be issues beyond, on their first pass, they would then kick that up to our transportation department. Our transportation department would start a more thorough and sort of engineered analysis of the street to see what the options are to achieve the width needed. It's generally about a 20-foot clear width that's needed for fire, sometimes less, but depending on the swing of vehicles and things like that. And so then our engineering department would study that and make recommendations to what could be done. They may identify scenarios for different recommendations, and those would be, if there's more than one option, may be discussed with the community to see what works best.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Commissioner, all right, Commissioner will tell me, and then I.
And am I correct that the fire department could make that call to you regardless of whether this building gets built? If, for example, there was a call on 12th Street today that they ended up having a problem, they could make that call about the width of the street and concern about the street, that you'd have to go through that analysis.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Gibson, we heard from one of our speakers, I think Mr. Peebles, about sort of concern about the auto turn of fire trucks kind of getting onto 12th Street. Can you address whether staff has looked at the auto turn of the apparatus that would be coming to the site, and can you address whether it can safely get onto 12th Street North?
So the auto turn analysis for fire trucks has been presented. Staff has reviewed it, and our fire department has reviewed it. We believe that the vehicles can make the turns within the right-of-way provided. That doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't elements of either shrubbery or other things in front of Mr. Peoples' house which may currently encroach into the right-of-way. So we'll have to take a much more detailed look as the applicant's engineering plans come through to see if there's minor elements of additional asphalt or something else that may need to be added within that existing 30-foot right-of-way that is 12th Road today.
Okay, so it's all within the existing right-of-way?
Correct.
Other questions? All right, yes, Commissioner McSweeney.
Actually, I'll save it for the parking.
Okay, well, guess what's up next? Mr. McSweeney.
Thank you. Could you tell me, I actually am not familiar with all the houses on 12th Street. Are there driveways for every house? Or are there some homes that don't have driveways? There was a comment, one of the speakers, and I'm not forgetting which one, mentioned the possibility of creating a special rule to allow the 12th Street neighbors to have higher lot coverage to be able to park on their land. So I was just curious if that meant that 12th Street houses don't have parking or driveways.
So I'm pretty sure I'm going to say that all of them have it, but then one may not. So I think that if there's anybody in the neighborhood that can speak up to that. Yeah, and so.
Okay, thank you.
He does, but we think that all of them have it. There may be one that is, let's say, grass covered and not very used today.
Curb cuts, okay. I do have another parking question, if I may. There, of course, has been a lot of, there was a lot of testimony about parking. And specifically about the numbers that were used for the parking ratios. and the properties that were used. And so there was a comment that there were other properties that perhaps were more comparable. But I guess what I wanted to ask, somebody brought up the springs and the views, but what I wanted to ask is there's a substantial number of 30% and 50% AMI apartments here. Do you find that people at 30% and 50% actually have cars, in your experience?
I can't generalize.
Ms. Romero, okay, there you go.
Okay, now I'm on. We are providing much more 30 and 50% units here than we are able to typically do, and then that's done in part because we have an American Legion who's been very generous with us in terms of the land costs and some of the seller note, as well as the reduced amount of costs because we are eliminating parking, so we were able to lower some of the AMIs, and it is our hope that by removing car ownership as an additional cost, that folks can come and live in Arlington and thrive in those units. But this is definitely innovation. So I can say from working at the Springs, APA's headquarters is co-located with the Springs. I was here this weekend on a Saturday because I forgot my laptop, and the parking was half empty. I mean, I was taking pictures on my iPhone because I couldn't believe it. It is definitely over-parked there, but that was a function of the RC zoning when we, first developed the Springs back in 2013. There was no residential parking study guidance. There was no, so we were kind of evolving with the planning tools and the planning guidance that the county's coming out with, as well as the Affordable Housing Master Plan that was passed in 2015. And frankly, being pushed to do more with less. I mean, there's not enough AHIF, so we have to find ways to create affordable housing, and the cost of parking is a barrier. So this is, something we're deeply committed to, and I think we know it requires a bigger TDM than we've had to implement. You saw from the list that our traffic consultant, we commissioned a parking justification letter as part of the SPRC so that Rose Lake could do a deeper dive in how we could justify this lower parking ratio. And it will involve management, but we also have the benefit of having 16 properties in our portfolio. So if someone is in affordable housing, is in need of affordable housing, and they need cars to function as part of their family or as part of their job, when you have that big a portfolio, it's easy for us to present the option that suits that person's lifestyle. So I think that is also the benefit of being deep in this community.
Right. Commissioner Patel.
Thank you. We've heard, we've heard so many comments about parking ratios. I'm wondering about the comparables in this particular situation because I know that there's a 50% veterans preference here. There's some comments in some of the materials that have been provided. Specifically looking at the commitment to provide for housing for active duty, military, and veterans, and people who are commuting long distances. I just wonder, where are those comparables? Because that's not what the other buildings look like.
It's funny you should say that because there is a veterans housing project in the district, the Conway House, is it the Jill and? Yep, and they have 0 parking for their veterans affordable housing program. They, again, have a lot of lower AMI tiered units, and we went to visit that as part of our inspiration for this project. We traveled to New York, we traveled to Connecticut, but the one we traveled to in DC with the 0 parking really inspired us too. We're not quite there at 0, but certainly in the RB, we should be pushing ourselves to do what they've proven can be done.
I just have one quick follow-up, because they're in the letter from the Military and Veterans Affairs Committee. I'm wondering, with regard to the income-qualified active duty, active service members, is there some consideration to create like a shuttle that will take these individuals back and forth to address some of the parking issues as well?
That is a great idea, and we are very actively in discussions with the Joint Base Commander, and they are thrilled about helping us figure out how to bring life to this building, and we will certainly ask.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner
Thank
Patel.
you.
Commissioner Gearin. Maybe else on parking. Yes, Commissioner Steinberger.
I don't know if this is the time for this. I wanted to, one of the comments from the neighbors, I believe, addressed what the hours were for parking in the neighborhood, and I would like to indicate that that would be something I'd want to discuss either now or whenever appropriate, that I think that's something to be looked at. Yeah. Oh, this was the time. Great. No, I do think that as the changes are happening in the neighborhood, that this is the time that we do want to kind of give greater consideration to what those hours should be and if there should be extended parking permit preference in the neighborhood and the surrounding streets as we're looking at this kind of substantial change. And I think that something I appreciate from the neighbors is that this is an important resource to bring to the community, and I think there's a lot of support for an understanding for the need for affordable housing in this kind of a project, but I think that we should be looking at different ways that that change can be managed with things like looking at what the RPP ratios are and what that looks like for the community too. So.
Thank you, Commissioner Steinberg.
Comment.
Yes, Commissioner Siegel.
Just a question about RPP. It's under review or going to be under review. Can you just tell us about, do you have a time table for when we might see some result from your review?
Go ahead. I actually, just by coincidence, attended the residential parking permit team meeting this morning. It's about a year away from any recommendations. Right now, they're synthesizing the input they got from the community.
Super, thank you.
Let me just add one thing. So while that is under review, the county board has directed staff to put a hold on decision-making for applications, just as that's where the program stands.
It's a current moratorium, correct, Mr. Correct. Okay.
Quick follow-up. So, for example, while you are reviewing the RPP, would you look at 12th Street? Would that be part of your review?
So I do want to state for the record, staff does not believe that this project and the proposed parking ratio will have the impact that requires additional RPP regulations. That said, the RPP process would not be able to take any additional requests to study this. And furthermore, since the RPP is largely an observation-based response in the current protocols, until this project is delivered, you likely would not see the demand if it should materialize the way the neighbors have identified.
All right, anybody else on parking? All right, let's move on to the special GLUP plus. Anybody have questions under that? All right, moving along. So construction phasing. I want to invite gentlemen back forward to kind of talk through sort of your, and Mr. Schultz, if you can pull up the applicant's presentation. All right, floor is yours. Kind of walk us through briefly the construction phasing plan.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Patience with us earlier in cutting you off, but again, floor is yours. Thank you.
No problem. So what you see up on the screen right now is our basically our circulation plan. All construction traffic will only make right-in, right-out turns into the site. If we go to the next slide. Thank you. This shows our construction plant layout. The site will be screened on all sides, all three sides, four sides, however you want to call it, with green screen and fencing. And if you notice how the walkway, the pedestrian walkway, is inset into the site. It's very tight. And normally, what we like to try to do is put a pedestrian walkway on the outside, so you're never lifting loads over top of a pedestrian walkway. Unfortunately, we don't have the width here. So what our plan is to actually take a portion of our property to pull trucks off Washington Boulevard. Again, they'll be coming from the east. The lane is 10 foot 2 inches wide, so we'd actually have to take about 6 feet into the property in order to turn that truck and land it safely, as well as have barrels separating the lane. The lane would be closed roughly from 7 to 3:30, and then open back up so that at night there would be 4 lanes of traffic at all time. Other than that, the plan shows shows the crane swing and some traffic control items. Other than that, that's pretty much it.
All right. I have some questions, but I want to go to my colleagues first to see if you have some questions on this. Anybody have questions on construction phasing? We heard some comments from the public tonight about agreements to get with the neighbors before you swing anything over their house. I think you addressed this in site plan, but want to ask again. You are intending to get agreements with any property owner?
So so we will not swing any loads over anybody's property. The tower crane that we're using is a fixed base, a traditional saddle strut crane. So it has to swing freely. It has to weather vane during weather so that you don't have any issues with that. But we will never swing over somebody's property. I mean, we'll never swing a load over anybody's property. If for some reason we were to do that, we will definitely get not a release, but we'll have an easement from that property owner. We'll also put them on our certificate of insurance and make sure all those conditions are covered.
Okay. And then how long do you anticipate Wash Boulevard, that lane being shut down? I know you said the times of day, but.
So it would be, so we're looking for 7 to 3:30 to shut the lane down and then turn it over. We've done this similarly on Columbia Pike at our Gilliam project. So a similar type thing where that's a roadway that's very busy, obviously. It's 4 lanes, same sort of issue. It's got bus traffic and everything else. And it worked out quite successfully to keep the trucks out of the neighborhood.
I guess I mean in kind of length in terms of weeks or months.
It would be for a long duration of the project. For the most part, that's going to have to be every morning for the better part of 2 years.
All right. Yes, Commissioner McSweeney.
I just wanted to ask, could you give us a little bit more of a description of the screening, especially on the west side? How tall is it? What would it consist of? And is there any noise abatement or?
Yes, thank you. So yes, so as to screening, well, as you know, we're only allowed 7-foot-high fence, so typically a 6-foot-high construction fence, chain link type fence would go up. And then we screen it with what's called a green screen, so you have some opaqueness to it, but still allows air to go through, so they are not blown down. And at certain points in time, we might actually even drive them into the ground so they're permanent. They're not going to be on concrete blocks, particularly if it's going to be there for a while, and the west property line will be. In addition, because of concerns raised by the neighbors, we have put some sound soak type material on that west side, on that west fence line. Honestly, it will do have some effect on echoing, but construction noise waves travel, so it will help with the echoing, but and we have included that. All along the west side, and then stretching about 75, 100 feet along the north property line as well.
Anything else, Commissioner McSweeney? And I think you mentioned this is site plan, but you're going to be the contact for the neighbors, correct, if they have any issues, right? So he's your guy.
I am the community liaison on most projects, and then as we get the superintendent involved, obviously that person is also involved as well.
I would encourage you, if there are neighbors here, to kind of make sure you pass out your card to folks here. I'm sure Mr. Cook already has your contact information. He's the Civic Association president, but encourage you to kind of exchange information this evening. Are there any other questions on construction phasing? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr.
I just wanted to make one point, just because I think it's very important for the community to understand. It is the county's priority to keep the sidewalk on the north side open. However, this is an extremely constrained site, and as construction unfolds, DES will take pedestrian safety as the priority, and if it is safest to move pedestrians off that north side of the sidewalk, we may end up having to do that at some point during construction. That is not our goal, but we don't want to promise to the community that could be maintained throughout without question.
That's a good point. Thank you, Mr. Gibson. And the people in the audience probably can't see this or read this, but the red image here is the covered walkway, correct, Mr. Gibson? So, which should be maintained, as you said, throughout construction. Well, thank you for your time this evening. We will move on to the MTP amendments. If there are any kind of questions about the split designation, the kind of TC's recommendation that the whole thing be shared street or anything else. Yes, Commissioner Morton.
I know some of these are new categories, but I wondered whether you could tell me how typical is it to have this split typology on a short street like that? And do you have any precedents that show that that would be successful and effective in making that distinction?
Well, this would be the precedent, I think, because we really haven't used the shared street and in any other development that I know of. They're part of our master transportation plan, and we have identified it in some sector plans, but this may be the first place where we actually are approving it as part of our project.
What about other kinds of split typologies in other situations? Is that something very typical? Or?
Well, I mean, both sections are intended to be local streets, and so the differentiation is sort of in a lot in the detail of whether the urban center is local, which is is a little more kind of the average street that you might see, as opposed to the shared street, which is unique and has some features that aren't very common and are intended to kind of create a little more traffic calming and a kind of more shared flow. So.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Latelmi.
I don't know how DDOT classifies them, but the access streets into the District Wharf site are all designed to read as shared streets, and they come off of traffic lights on Main Avenue, all of them. And I think that would be illustrative for what we, at Planning Commission, when we were going through the Special Club study, what I believe our intent was to want to have shared streets through this site and all the way through, regardless of whether there was a traffic light controlling that intersection with Washington Boulevard or for Kirkwood for that matter. We think that there is precedent for it in this region at least, that if you go take a look at District Wharf, that might be the best way or to show how this could work. I just throw that out there as we do have at least some examples of it around here.
Thank you, Commissioner Latelmi. Other folks on this issue? Commissioner McSweeney.
I'm not sure if it belongs here, but I'll go ahead. There were some concerns raised specifically by Mr. Lunger, I believe, about the actual connection all the way to Kirkwood from 12th, and I may have misread his comment, but it sounded like from the access for fire trucks and smaller trucks, that perhaps that curve would be a problem. Could you maybe address that, have us take a look at it? And yeah, you have the picture up. Could you talk about this access, who you expect to use it? Because I confess I'm a little confused when you're splitting Kansas, because it is ultimately going to connect up and through the other way to Kirkwood, right? That is the intent.
Yeah, and I think in our staff report, we do really identify that even that pedestrian priority segment that we've split, we feel may get reevaluated in the future planning processes as the use of that area changes. That said, getting back to your first question, which was how would that change over time, and how might we get something similar to what you see on the screen? What we recognize is that all of that east-west connection is completely up to the type, form, and development that the Y proposes. We want all of these streets to be appropriately designed for their context. We're not trying to design roads for infrastructure's sake. We want them to be integral parts of the community which support whether it's open space or if there are garage and loading. You may have different design characteristics along that east-west connection. And then you also may make different decisions on how that street should be built based on the amount of traffic or use that is going on the Y site and how it might funnel out to other roadways like Washington Boulevard, such that 13th Street to the north is de-emphasized. And so I think that we can't presume what the Y is going to bring forward currently, but we are confident that all of the design work that we've done here can support any number of options that could come forward.
Thank you. Could I do a follow-up? And I think there was also, perhaps in the letter, there was some question of perhaps fairness. In your presentation, it appeared to me that the easement that APA is giving, or the applicant is giving, would be the same that you would be requiring of the YMCA. Is that correct? So when we were, Peter, can you go down to the slides with the additional cross-sections? Sorry. So these are slides that we presented for the SPRC process looking at this issue. And so a full urban center local street that might have sidewalks and street trees and 2 travel lanes, maybe parking interspersed between the street trees, you could fit that within a 50-foot section. And that would require about 25 feet of space on the YMCA site. And so we've shown it as 25 feet, including the 5-foot offset on the APA Legion site. And Peter, if you go down a couple slides, maybe one. Sorry. And then we also recognize that we could have a smaller section for the road. It could function much more like an alley, which you might not necessarily have sidewalks on both sides or street trees on both sides. And in that case, you could get down to a 40-foot cross-section, which would only require a 15-foot dedication on the APA site. So excuse me, the Y site. And so what we feel is that it is entirely up to what the Y's plan is, what dedication will be needed.
All right, Commissioner Siegel.
I wanted to go back to the shared street urban center local split. I think I heard you say that the reason, or not the street light, but the second reason to create the split is you believe there'll be more traffic on the first, isn't it sort of 2/3 of that street, as opposed to the butt-end cul-de-sac end of the street. Is that correct? That was a number, you had 3 reasons for it. One was the stoplight, the other was amount of traffic. I forget your third.
Width was the last one, right?
The width is the same though, is it not? The street doesn't narrow as you get north, correct?
So I think that this is really a question of all 3 of those factors coming together.
Okay.
And so.
But the width doesn't narrow, right?
The width does not narrow.
Right, okay.
And so, but what does happen is south of, or at the split in designation, everywhere south of that is where we would expect the vehicle traffic for the APA site and ultimately the casual adventure site to be operating and working within. And so.
Eventually, correct? Eventually.
Yes.
Okay, so I guess from my point of view as a driver, if I needed to get onto that roadway, I would do it. I mean, will there be a dead end site, a sign, indicate so that people don't sort of bumble into the roadway and then get stuck at a cul-de-sac?
Well, I'm sure that people will, but we will have signage that says dead end, no outlet, We probably will add additional signage where that transition occurs just to reinforce
What
that.
would it say?
Dead end.
Oh, you mean at the, where the road, the designation of the road changes?
Yeah.
I mean, what I'm getting at is, if you need to get into that site, aside from the people who might mistake it, but if you need to get into the site, you would. I'm thinking about the Transportation Commission's recommendation, and I'm sort of trying to evaluate whether I would support that or not. And it just would seem to me that the utilization would depend on who needs to get into the site, whatever you call the road. So that would argue against sort of splitting it, although I do like the idea of the pavers.
No, I mean, our perspective is mainly that on that southern segment, and I fully agree with Jim's statement about, or Commissioner Lamtomi's statement about the wharf. The land use and characteristics of the wharf are vastly different than what you'll see here. The amount of pedestrians and the amount of activity that are going on at the wharf is you know, night
10
and day
times
different.
this, yes.
I don't even hesitate to multiply it. But in this scenario, we are very concerned at intentionally putting pedestrians in the same space as cars. And that's what shared streets do.
I see.
And so that's why we've recommended the shared street, the split in designation.
Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Steinberger.
I understand, and I certainly appreciate that. And obviously, when you have interactions between pedestrians and cars, bad things can happen. The abundance of bikes and scooters and everything just complicates things. I guess I'm trying to figure out how we've really reduced the safety risks there by creating what I think could be kind of a confusing scenario in which you've taken a transit path and turned it into two different things midway. I actually think that has the potential to be more confusing and create more unpleasant interactions between those parties. And I guess, could you speak a little more to how that evaluation and why you are not concerned with that? Or if you are concerned with that, tell me that too, because I'm having trouble with that.
So I think that we would be concerned with it as the block redevelops and vehicular traffic north of that driveway becomes commonplace. With the operation of simply, you know, a vehicle that needs to turn around or something like that very rarely. On that northern segment, we still do feel that's going to function more as a shared space. And then south of there and even along there, both segments will have dedicated pedestrian space, so pedestrians can get into a sidewalk area if that's what they feel like they need to do, and that's what they should be doing south of that point. I do agree with you that if this was a regularly traveled road to the north, we probably wouldn't recommend the shared space along this segment, but until we see what comes and when it comes, we think it's fine.
Follow up, Commissioner Steinberger?
I mean, and I guess you've alluded to this again. You're reiterating that this is sort of a stopgap. This is the temporary design plan until the Y development is sort of known?
Yes.
Okay, which, just to be clear, could be some number of many years.
It could follow along in 18 months, or it could be indefinitely postponed.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner, only tell me.
Commissioner Siegel sort of anticipated, I will be making a motion on this to make us consistent with the Transportation Commission's recommendations. Surprise. I do think, and we can have further discussion at that point, I suppose, but I do think that, well, I have one question. On the, as you propose to have it as an urban street on the southern end, would it have to then be the traditional curb gutter, asphalt in the middle, or could it actually have pavers and flat? Is it design dependent? Is the designation dictate the design?
I would say that it's not entirely dependent, but I do think that as you get to that paver look, it starts to encourage people to operate the way they see it, say in the wharf. We're starting to create design expectations across our region and where people see something and they've seen it before and react the same way.
Commissioner Gearin.
Along with these comments of Commissioner Lantelmi and Commissioner Steinberger, looking on the alley cross-section page from APA's presentation, I wonder if we do have more options in designing what this is like so that it is more pedestrian friendly, regardless of what we call it. And I don't know if you can walk us through that right now, or yes, this is it. So for example, we've got the tree on the east side, and then we've got 11-foot travel lanes, and I'm not a transportation planner, but I believe lanes can go smaller than that. Could we give ourselves enough space to put a tree on the other side and put something like these pavers down? It would slow traffic down and it would make it more inviting and get to that unification with perhaps the north part of the street.
I think that you're entirely right, and I think this is part of our challenge with more so the east-west connector than this one right here. This is not driven by our design choices on how to make this the best spot for exactly what is intended in the plan. Staff would love to take the shared street designation and design this space to do that. We don't think that you can when you have this 26 feet of travelway that you need to maintain for fire access. It's not a question of us wanting some totally functional different thing. It's that we have a bunch of different needs that frankly weren't considered in the special GLEP study. The fire needs is a very, not say unique, but it is a very site-specific need that was not previously contemplated, and that does dictate it the width.
But just to follow up, I understand the 26-foot right-of-way dedication. If I'm reading this right, it's 28 feet. If we added an extra 2 feet on the west side, could we plant something there and make it more inviting and perhaps create a perception for the driver to slow things down? Is my math wrong? 11, 11, and 6?
There's 4 for fire access. If you look above the 6 on the see.
Yeah, I'm looking at 6 here, 11, 11.
But it says 4 for fire access. Sorry, above that.
I see. I see. So this 2 over here does not count.
Correct.
We're going to try to pull up an easier to read cross-section.
And it would also get at the questions about increasing the tree canopy and the vegetation in the area, some buffer with the neighbors.
Unfortunate. Go ahead. There just is no room on the west side to accommodate the 2 travel lanes. The on-street parking is 7 feet wide, which is the minimum we have. We want to have 6-foot wide sidewalk and planting strip. Something would have to give on the other side of the project in order to add room to the other side. The 26 feet from the fire marshal is non-negotiable. That's why we have that extra 4-foot strip. We have 2 feet left over for planting. Unfortunately, probably cannot take trees, and for an opaque fence to shield the neighbors.
So we have to have the 26 feet paved, no planting.
That's right. You can't have planting in the fire strip.
Though Peter has identified the condition against the single-family homes, which we don't expect to change because of the plan. But we do expect that adjacent to casual adventure, there may be opportunities, depending what's appropriate, to pick up street trees on that edge, possibly. And so I think that western edge for casual adventure south is in question when that redevelops.
Anything else, Commissioner? Commissioner Morton.
Thanks. just echoing some of Commissioner Guerin's comments, I thought I remembered during the SPRC meeting some discussion that the fire trucks could in fact go over like turf. And I'm kind of echoing previous comments. I think I heard that the lanes on Washington Boulevard would be 11 or maybe even 10 feet wide, and these 11 feet wide on this kind of road seems excessive compared to that.
I totally agree with the lane width comment. The lane widths here are not designated to mean anything related to what the road should travel like or anything. It's simply a fact that we have to get to 26 somehow, and if the applicant wanted, there are things that we could do to make possibly more of the fire lane wider and the lane smaller, but in the end, the combination of those travel lanes and the fire lane have to be 26 feet.
And then the fire lane, the only thing that they could have is turf. You can't have any sort of other landscaping in that area. It needs to be clear and able to be plowed.
But turf would be possible.
Turf would be possible. When we discussed with the fire marshal, Rob, if I remember, he did not prefer the turf because it tends to get...
So it's not turf. It's the structural turf, which is the concrete rings with little plugs of grass in them. And what the fire marshal had stated was that they certainly can do that, but what they have found from experience is that as that gets plowed, the plow catches on one of those rings, pops it up, and there's a long-term maintenance issue. Now that's what their experience has been, and so that's why we are with the concrete in this case.
Nothing else? Okay. Mr. Gibson, I missed this when we were talking about streets. The gentleman from Lion Village mentioned the cross-section lane width on Washington Boulevard. I wonder if you could kind of address the lane width on Wash Boulevard. I think looking in the 4.1, it seems to not change, but I wonder if you could kind of address that.
So as we've looked at this, there's a couple of factors that relate to how to address Washington Boulevard. The first priority that we've looked at is that we want to improve the pedestrian environment along Washington Boulevard. So that's adding about 11 feet of space, 16 feet of space out of the site. The next priority that we wanted to do, which we never did on the south side of the street. So the entire south side of the street has redeveloped over the past 15 years. In that process, we didn't get on-street parking. I don't know why we didn't get it, but in this case, we are trying to get on-street parking along the north side of the road, get the 7 feet for that. So that's our second priority. And then when we look at the roadway width, we see that the road functions today with its curb width, with its lane widths. We don't think that this is a best opportunity to do this particularly. We haven't heard much redevelopment interest for the blocks, the two parcels to the east of here. So there could be a patchwork of lane widths as you go down Washington Boulevard. So in this case, we feel that keeping the lane as it is, the roadway width as it is, keeps consistency throughout, and then we are prioritizing taking space away from the development potentials on the north for pedestrians and parking.
All right. Yes, Commissioner Lynn, tell me.
We do have the pull-out lane in front of the building. It's how many feet wide is that?
It will be a 7-foot parking lane.
7 feet. We also have the 11th Street property, and that's a pretty long stretch from Kirkwood toward this site. So we already have part of the patchwork happening. When Wilson Boulevard has been redeveloping all along it, it is a patchwork now. It gets really wide in some spots, then it narrows back where it's the old stuff, and then where development is, it widens out again. So it is a bit of a mess that way, but it is getting more space on it. And we've been doing that consistently for 30 years. Washington Boulevard, you're right, it is narrow. I guess it's functioning, but it is really narrow. And I agree with pedestrian priority for this. Widening those sidewalks should be our first thing. But we do have the opportunity for this whole side to get more width. I would say that 7 feet that we use there could at some point be then dedicated to widening the travel lanes if it comes to it? But are we also going to be doing that with the 11th Street project and getting extra width there? I think we are, but not all the way through it.
So not to jump the gun on the SPRC process for that, but what the plans show is that basically the western 50% of that block will add on-street parking.
Not the whole thing.
The eastern portion of that block is not adding on-street parking because of the stormwater structures and those issues there. And so that's what's proposed. We may see changes to that plan, but it's generally consistent with what we're seeing at this site.
It's just that Washington Boulevard really is so narrow here. We can never have bike lanes on it. We can never have parking on it. You know, it's just, it's stuck what it is. And I'm wondering whether we really have end up missing an opportunity yet again, since we missed it on the south side.
I think that's probably an issue of how much cross-section you have, how much width you have in the whole street to kind of have, and it's also an arterial road, trying to make sure everything can happen in the same space, but I can understand the point. Anything else? Did you, Commissioner Morton, kind of ask your buffering question? You've sufficiently asked that? I think you kind of,
I had a slightly different specific buffering question. It's really in part a question to my fellow commissioners. Given what seems to be a pretty small 2-foot buffer right now between the western side and the neighborhood, and I know some of that's being taken up by the fence, there's been discussion about the possibility of promising in some way that the applicant provides some buffering on the other side of the fence. I know that's a complicated process. Is there something that we can do as a planning commission to ensure or encourage that? I know it's tricky, but is it, since it's a concern, and I'm a bit concerned about that 2-foot buffer myself, is there something that we can do to make sure that that can happen more easily?
you can certainly recommend sort of whatever you want, Commissioner Morton, in terms of increased buffer or increased screening. Get to a motion if that's something you want to suggest.
But on the I just don't know factually on the property that's not the applicant's property.
No, I mean the applicant during the SPRC's process had expressed a willingness to engage with neighbors and helping them plant additional buffer. And I don't know if Ms. Romero wants to speak to that or Mr. Kinney, but reaching for the microphone. But I think that was something that was at least discussed. Mr. Kinney?
Yeah, I think it's an option. We don't have the ability to go on anybody else's property, and the casual eventual existing building is right on the property line because it's a side yard. We created, county and ourselves created that 2-foot strip so that the residents, it was represented by Mr. Peoples tonight, and Casual Ventures did not get a street next to them because then they become a corner lot and both of their lots become non-conforming immediately overnight. We didn't want to do that to them, so we put the planting strip in there both to meet the design so we could build the wall, build a fence to block it, but also as a mechanism really to protect those two property owners in some ways from becoming a corner lot. We didn't need, the staff said you didn't need the extra width at this point in time for the street. The county will own it. They can do with what they want in the future if the road needs to be widened to cover a casual venture development. We didn't want to put the neighbor, we don't have that good a relationship with the neighbor, quite bluntly, but we certainly didn't want to do him any harm on this. So that was kind of our thinking on it.
Mr. Kinney, could you speak to, or Ms. Romero, speak to the applicant's willingness to engage in or do some additional?
I think we've said throughout the process that that's something we'd engage in. We haven't, it's been difficult for us to have a discussion. He has his perceived views and we have ours, and so we're not unwilling to do it. It's just, there hasn't been an actual good mechanism to encourage that.
Thank you, Mr. Kinney. Any other follow-up on that, on this issue? Okay, so we're kind of to the catch-all. Oh, yes, Commissioner Gearin.
I have a little bit more on vegetation.
Yep.
Okay. I understand that APA won't be able to meet all of the replacement tree planting on site, and I wonder if we've given any thought, excuse me, to other places they might plant those trees in the general vicinity. For example, will we need any tree planting in the Ball Family Cemetery? Do any of the neighbors proximate to the APA site, would they appreciate having a tree that might provide some sort of a buffer? If they don't plant the tree, they pay into a tree replacement fund. So this is going to happen either way, and I'm sure their preference is to add it to the community in which they're trying to build and improve. So can staff give me a sense of what our options are here? Or Ms. Romero, if you've thought about this?
Mr. Schultz, you want to take that first?
I was going to say, we had negotiated with them in condition 19, the landscaping condition, that tree replacement could be accommodated in the same block. So they couldn't plant trees on a property they own a mile away. But if they can meet their tree canopy requirement and their tree replacement requirement on the same block, that helps accomplish the goals of the plan.
Does that mean elsewhere within the special GLEP study area?
Yes. Yeah, within the special GLEP study area, yes.
And then a follow-up on this. We do love to see our trees replaced, and that's been a longstanding policy. Part of that is because of the benefits we get from greenery and vegetation. And so to the extent that there just may not be enough room on the APA Legion site to plant these trees, and I appreciate that you have shrub planting as well, I'm wondering if there are other things you might consider. For example, that wall on the west side is a really good location for a lovely native vine. Mr. Staples and his wife can help you find some, and I can recommend one that's native, that's been evergreen the last couple of years, even in our crummy weather. So you still get that sense of vegetation and all the benefits that people get from regular access to seeing something green and flowering. Same thing with your green roof. I know that our experience has been that only certain plants tend to thrive on the green roof, but I wonder if we could talk with some of our local experts at Cooperative Extension and so on, and just see what's the low-hanging fruit that might also, if you had something pretty that trickled over the side. I know Ms. Romero and I have talked about this before and the benefits that we get from this, and so I know this won't address the tree canopy issue, and I'm not going to propose an amendment, but I wonder if you'd be thinking about that, and I'd be happy to talk with you afterwards, or as I say, some of the neighbors in the area are expert gardeners.
APA would certainly love to chat with you after this, and we have a good relationship with Virginia Cooperative Extension on programming, and had actually talked to them about this site early on, and it'd be a good time to come back to them.
All right, anything else on landscape or buffer? Okay. All right. Anybody? All right. Yeah, okay, catch-all. We're moving to catch-all.
This is a two-part question, I guess first for Mr. Schultz and then for the applicant. Do we have adequate polling places in the area? And if not, is the Legion site an appropriate venue for polling?
I haven't specifically spoken to the elections board about that. One of the conditions, it's not a standard condition, but one of the conditions we do suggest to an applicant is agreeing to, if necessary, host a polling place. I did so with the applicant. They were reluctant to agree to that. It's not one of our standard conditions. It's more like if they agree to do it, great.
I thought it might actually be beneficial to their residents. They wouldn't have to travel far. That's fine. Thank you for raising.
The Carrie Johnson question. So she would be proud of you. Commissioner Siegel.
Just a very quick question about your type A units, the handicapped units. I was actually speaking with Rosemary the other day, and she raised an issue that some of these type A units have bathtubs in them, and they shouldn't. They should have roll-in showers. Do your units have roll-in showers and no bathtubs?
We only do roll-in showers in our type A's. Yep.
Very good.
Anything else, Commissioner Siegel? Okay. Anything else on sort of other catch-all? All right, Commissioner Steinberger.
I apologize, I didn't think of this until now, but when we were talking about sort of the bollards and the chain kind of thing, I didn't know if there's another option. I've seen, having just more bollards as opposed to not kind of having the chain, if you just kind of space them differently and there's still some like removable ones. I didn't know if that was something that was viable. Apologies, didn't think of it until later.
Okay.
So we've worked with the fire marshal on looking at this. In the past, we've allowed removable bollards, but what our fire department has found is that they don't get removed enough, so they eventually freeze, and when they need to remove them, they can't remove them. So they really are strongly supportive of the design proposed. There are elements like little flags or reflective tape or other things that can go hanging off of the chain such that it looks more visually noticeely, more to the point that we had earlier. And so there are some things like that the chain may have a slightly different elements on it to make sure people see it, particularly motorists. So.
I apologize for going back to landscaping briefly and kind of street cross sections. So in the on page 61 of the staff report, at the bottom of the page, I'll let you get there. I just want you to kind of help me understand, and I'm also looking at the 4.1 on C406. Just looking at the cross section for the kind of north alley, and staff report, the conditions down towards the bottom of page 61, tree pits is crossed out. But in the 4.1 for section DD, it looks like you have trees in that planting strip. And I'm just wondering if staff can kind of clarify to me.
So that's very easy. It's just that we envision a planting strip with trees and not individual 5x12 tree pits.
Okay, that's a good explanation. Thank you, Mr. Gibson. All right, and now Mr. Lentelme.
I wasn't sure where this would come up, so I'm raising it at the very end. The garage, there will be a garage door on the entrance. There's been questions about the headlights angling up. Wouldn't that be taken care of by the garage? You have a garage door that isn't going to open till a car actually pulls up the ramp. So the headlights will be hitting the garage door rather than going out until the car gets close. Are you going to have those rapid opening like car dealers have?
We have a very fast garage door or Ritec door that is actually in place at the springs. It's kind of our new standard, and the reason why we pick it is because it's really the fastest door that's actually very durable. We've discussed it with staff and showed it to the neighbors that were willing to come over and see the Springs building.
Okay, so there will not be headlights shining up from the bottom of the ramp because
well, I think
the garage door will be there.
the exhibit we showed, obviously when the door opens,
Right, but
very
it'll only
quickly.
be up close
Right.
when that happens,
Right.
when it's already beginning to level out.
That's any corrections. So that's I think what the exhibit was trying to show.
Thank you.
And I want to thank the applicant for doing the extra analysis here. I did ask this at SPRC, so thank you for doing it and including it in your presentation. Other kind of catch-all, Commissioner McSweeney.
So I just had a question about the supportive housing units. Are those specifically going to be the 30% units, or which were all, I think, one bedroom, or were there going to be a mix as well in terms of the unit size?
We're working with the Department of Human Services now. I believe they're set aside to have the 50% units, and that's just because of a requirement of the VHDA kind of tax credit app that the 30% are not to have the rent subsidy associated with it that we typically have as part of the permanent supportive housing. And We usually have one-bedrooms, but we may have a mix of maybe one of them being a two-bedroom. But we're still fine-tuning all the details with the Department of Human Services.
And the accessible units, I don't remember, Commissioner Siegel, if you asked about the mix. Were accessible units going to be in the 2 and 3 bedrooms as well, or do you know what that mix is yet?
Yeah, we also usually have a variety of unit types.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Commissioner Ricks?
I just wanted to get clarity on the vegetated roofs. Currently, there are 2 sections. They're very small. They're difficult to see. There's one with, I believe, 3 to 6 inches of growth medium, and another one with 6 to 12 inches of growth medium. Of the different green roofs, where do you propose the more intensive, I think it's called intensive vegetated roof?
Our civil from Walter Phillips will come to the podium and answer that. Sorry, take 1 second.
I ask mainly because the deeper the medium, the more robust and the more options you have for planting. And I was curious if that would be at the lower levels where it could be appreciated more.
Well, that answer, she's getting that answer.
I know.
Okay, sorry.
If you could please identify yourself for the record.
I'm Antoinette Isherwood with Walter Phillips. Sorry, I was trying to verify. So the courtyard area, that's the one that's not the terrace area, but the one that's closer to the front entrance, the roof above the front entrance, that's the one that's going to have the more robust green roof section.
So do you want to, so I'm sorry, which one, Antoinette? The one-story?
Yes, so the area, so that lower area is going to be the one that's going to have the deeper green roof section. Sure.
Commissioner Morton?
And just follow up, to what extent would that be visible from, say, the neighbors on 12th Street or passersby?
If you can come back to the microphone, please, or?
It's probably not going to be visible at ground level. And even, it might be visible from like their second stories.
Mr. Atkinson, do you want to address that?
Yeah, you know, the one-story section is going to be 16 feet or so up in the air. So, and typically on what you plant on green roofs is a sedum of some sort. So it's not anything that really grows up very high. You know, so we would could look for something, but you know, think about it. If you're on the sidewalk next to the building, you look up, you're not going to see anything. And then if you're across the street and you're looking up, unless something's 3 or 4 feet high, you're really not going to. The angle of vision is not going to be such that you can really see much. And you're not going to put anything that high on a green roof just because it's probably not going to survive. Or what you'd have to do would be pretty special to provide, the drainage and everything else that would go along with that. I mean, it's really there to help with low impact development criteria for stormwater and also for energy. I mean, our company's done about 16 million square feet of LEED projects, and I don't know how many thousands of square feet of green roof, but I don't think we have anything where anything's gotten up any higher than about like that.
Thank you. All right. I do want to get us to a motion relatively soon, but if there are some burning questions people have, we can entertain a few more minutes of that, but we do want to get to kind of motions, as I'm sure we'd have some discussion as well. So bottom of the hour, I want to be at motion. So it looks like Commissioner, and I do want to, we will have discussion about some of the things we tabled. So I know I tabled something that Commissioner McSweeney discussed, but we will certainly have ample time to discuss those. But
And you want that after the motion?
I would like it after a motion.
Okay.
Have a motion on the table, and then I do want to discuss the things that we kind of put on the back burner.
Then I'll hold for then.
Okay. Are there other questions at the moment? All right. So I've asked Commissioner Hughes to kind of take our motions one at a time this evening as they build on each other. So I'll turn it over to Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you, Commissioner Schroll. For those of you who are curious, I'm reading off of page 2, County Manager's recommendation. The first action before us will be a resolution to adopt the special GLUP study and move forward with it. As a reminder, this would have been advertised at the conclusion of the special GLUP study back in 2017. So I move that the Planning Commission recommend the County Board adopt the attached resolution to the amendment to the general land use plan from service commercial to semi-public to medium office apartment hotel for the property located at 3445 Washington Boulevard, known as RPC number 15-086-011.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner McSweeney. Any discussion on the motion? None. The question comes on the motion made by Commissioner Hughes and seconded by Commissioner McSweeney. All in favor? It's a unanimous vote. Do you have all that, Ms. Bowling? Okay. All right. Mr. Hughes.
Thank you. Now, as we have revised the special general land use plan, we will go forward with the rezoning of the current subject property. So I move the Planning Commission recommend the County Board adopt the attached ordinance to rezone from R5 one-family and restricted two-family dwelling district and C2 service commercial community business district to CO 2.5 mixed-use district and related update to the Arlington County zoning ordinance map 13-1 to amend Line A to encompass the property for the property located at 3445 Washington Boulevard, known as RPC number 15-086-011.
Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Gearin. Is there any discussion? All right. Hearing none, the question comes on the motion made by Commissioner Hughes and seconded by Commissioner Gearin. All in favor? Again.
Now that we have amended the general land use plan and rezoned the property, we will establish site plan number 449 with this action. I move that the Planning Commission recommend the County Board adopt the attached ordinance to approve site plan number 449 to construct a 160-unit multifamily dwelling with a ground floor membership club lodge use to the American Legion post for the modifications of use regulations, including additional density for the provision of on-site committed affordable housing, residential and membership club parking ratio, fence height, and other modifications as necessary to achieve the proposed development plan for the property located at 3445 Washington Boulevard, known as RPC number 15-086-011, subject to the conditions of the attached ordinance.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner McSweeney. Any discussion? Commissioner McSweeney.
Yes, thank you. At the very beginning of our conversation, I did bring up the question of the building height proposed, and I'm just going to make a comment on it because arguably the two comments we heard the most, I think, were about the precedent we were setting in going above that 80-foot height and also parking. So I just wanted to address that. In terms of the height, going up to 82.66 feet, I had a session previously where I'd asked specific questions about that, and I think we heard some reasons that it might be a little higher, including the venting for the food-related businesses and the additional height required for the loading dock and the fact that it was moved. I would also note that there was the undergrounding of the transformer, which, quite frankly, I found their second iteration of that acceptable. So the fact that it was actually put underground, I thought was pretty extraordinary. Speaking of extraordinary, I do want to go on record as saying the fact that we have 30% units, and I can't even remember the last time I saw 30% units in any affordable housing project, and the number of 50% are extremely numerous, and the fact that we have family-sized units, again, makes this project pretty extraordinary. Because I also was one of the commissioners back when we took the GLUP Plus vote, who said I thought we could go up to 7 stories. But we did decide that 7 stories were for exceptional circumstances. And I think that for all of the reasons I've just mentioned, this project certainly meets that exceptional circumstance. And I think the 2 feet, 8 inches is completely justified for this project. It doesn't mean that we're setting a precedent for other projects unless they come in with equally extraordinary situations. So I did want to address that. I did want to say also that I do support the lower parking ratio. We've seen a number of studies recently that indicate, and I would say, thank you for your extremely honest answer when I asked you if 30% and 50% people in 30 and 50% units would actually have cars. I think it's fairly unlikely that they would have cars, and the fact that this is so close to the Roslyn-Ballston corridor, to all sorts of public transportation, it makes a lot of sense that we would try, and granted, I understand, we are trying the parking ratio, the lower parking ratio. I also think that in the conversation, we talked about the fact that if it should turn out that more people were requiring either additional cars or additional transportation, that it sounded like you are willing to look at shuttles and some additional, perhaps some additional TDM or other options to to further ensure that people are not dependent on single-use vehicles. So for those reasons, I completely support this project.
Thank you, Commissioner McSweeney. Commissioner Gearin.
I echo those sentiments, and also I want to thank the community for raising all of these good points. The question I was going to ask about the parking that was raised by the community. What happens when there's a higher demand than supply? How do we deal with it? What was most heartening to me was that the applicant has thought of this, and this is the population they are most familiar with, and just the idea that we have thought of this and we have other places we can move them to if it turns out that there are more people who have cars. We have apartments with more parking than cars. So that's very reassuring to me as someone who sat up here for a few years. We ask questions of applicants all the time, and sometimes they haven't thought those through. So I thank the applicant for that, and I hope the community finds that a bit reassuring as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Gearin. Other thoughts? Yes, Commissioner Steinberger.
I think specifically going back to the question of the height that has been proposed, which is approximately 2.5 feet higher than what the GLUP study had recommended. I am highly sympathetic to the comments that have already come forth that we are really getting some kind of extraordinary community benefits as a result of this property, but I am equally sympathetic to the fact that we are, whether intentionally or not, we have multiple properties coming through at this site, and we are going to be setting some sort of precedent or not by the actions that we take with regards to this site plan and this property in the course of development. And I am not personally, as of yet, completely swayed that there were not other options, that if we're asking, for kind of good faith relationships with the property and the surrounding neighbors and kind of a synergy and harmony as we go forward, that it seems that we should be trying to live as much as we can by the determinations we laid out in the GLUP study and the different priorities that were sort of put forth. And so I'm still considering that myself, but I just put that out there.
I'm going to go Commissioner Lantelmi and then Commissioner Ricks. Commissioner Hughes.
Yes, well, I just want to go on record that I will be supporting this motion. I do believe that this is an extraordinary project. It's the right project in the right place at the right time. We desperately need the amount of affordable housing that this is providing. It's, as others have said, it's astonishing we're able to get this, and we need to seize this opportunity. I feel that what we're getting here is, with the American Legion getting its space and the ground floor, that is a long-term goal of the Special GLUP Study Plus. the affordable housing meets our comprehensive plan requirements and desires. I think on pretty much every single thing about this project fits our comprehensive plan, and that's what we're here as the protectors of. Because it fits the GLUP, it fits the affordable housing plan, it hits just about every other part of our comprehensive plan, I will be supporting this project and doing so enthusiastically. I congratulate both the American Legion and APA for coming together and bringing before us such a project. In addition to your listening to and taking into account various legitimate concerns of the neighborhood, and the neighborhood was very well represented here and has spoken up and given some very, very thoughtful comments. You've made a number of changes in response to that, which we don't always see either. So seeing all of that happening, I know the neighborhood's not getting everything it wants, but changes have been made in response to their very valid concerns. So anyway, that is why I will be going ahead and voting for this project.
Commissioner Ricks. Thank you, Commissioner Latami.
I'll speak quickly to the height issue. Along that western edge, the applicant can go 80 feet. What mitigated the extra 2 feet and 8 inches for me is the extensive modeling that they did to that northwest corner of the building. It's really adjacent to the residences. It's really just one story that steps up to 3 and then steps up to 4. So in my opinion, that more than mitigates the 2'8". Oh, I failed to mention, and it steps back 47 feet.
Thank you, Commissioner Ricks, for pointing that out. Commissioner Patel, and then we'll go with Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you. I just want to mirror the sentiments of Commissioner Guerin and say that I really am heartened by the applicant's consideration of all the comments with regard to parking. You know, as we live in a dense community with many forms of transportation, what struck me is the commitment that you have to working with the Joint Base and people there to try to determine if there are other alternative forms of transportation that could assist the people that are going to be living here. And I echo the sentiments of my fellow commissioners. This is truly a remarkable project. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Patel. Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you, Commissioner Stroll. I wanted to sort of end tonight I want to thank the community, first of all. I hope and I know that in 50 years, when all of us are gone and not trying to do this anymore, that when this next project comes down the line, the residents who we have join our community here will sit down at the table just like Lynbrook Townhome sat down at the table now, you know, and I'm very, very pleased with this. I also want to point out this is the first of 3 projects. It is an extraordinarily amazing contribution to the community at deep affordability levels made possible by the Legion and APA's deep commitment here. And with the 160 units, if in the next 2 buildings we stay under 1,000 units total, we will achieve our affordable housing master plan goal nearly of 17.7% of our units being committed affordable when we build new at this site. Now, how we move forward and whether contributions to the affordable housing unit counts on the site can occur at the other 3 or the other 2 projects is yet to be seen. But I do want my fellow commissioners to think about that as we move forward. I'm always pushing for that. And if we could achieve 17.7 within this little small area, what an amazing contribution that would be in my mind. I also want to challenge the Legion tonight. I don't think the Legion yet knows what its future has, and I am so happy about that. What I'm most happy about is its commitment to the future veterans. It's reaching out to them in new ways that is just incredible. I think that this site will be revolutionary as far as veterans in our community. I can't imagine a more collaborative space for veterans, for active duty military members who are challenged in affordability in our area. Make no doubt about it. It is a challenge to be affordable in our area, and the leadership of Bob and Bill and all of the veterans who really take part in the Legion activities will do nothing more than enhance the opportunities for the citizens and residents of this building. And they would otherwise not be connected without the daily routines of the Legion taking part in the community that is this building. And I think that this will be something that we hope to see around the country. And I really want our community to be a leader on that. So,
thank you, Commissioner Hughes. Before we vote on this item, I do want to thank, as Commissioner Lantelmi did, the neighbors and participants in the SBRC for their work and their efforts. I know many of you are frustrated and may remain so, but you did make this a better project. And so, as Commissioner Lentelmi noted, many of you, again, are still frustrated by where we are today, but I appreciate the manner in which you engaged the process. I appreciate the manner in which you reached out to planning commissioners to meet with us. And I encourage you all, as other projects come forward, to kind of continue to do that. This project is certainly better for it. I appreciate the applicant's kind of willingness to alter the design in the ways that our commissioners mentioned to respond to those concerns. And I too am certainly going to support this motion, and I'm excited about the 30% AMI units we're getting, the family units we're getting here on site, so I'm encouraged by that. So, if there's nothing else, we'll have a vote on the motion. All in favor? It's unanimous. All right. Want to make the motion on? Sure, Commissioner Lentelmi.
Get it on. I move to amend the resolution for adopting an amendment to the Master Transportation Plan.
Commissioner Lentelmi, that's out of order.
I need to do.
I'll do it. That's fine.
Why don't you move it?
We'll go with the amendment. We'll go it that way. I move the Planning Commission recommend the County Board adopt the attached resolution to approve the amendment to the Master Transportation Plan, MTP Map C Figure 1, to add a new section of North Kansas Street, north of Washington Boulevard. This is the County Board Agenda report dated February 1, 2019.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right, seconded by Commissioner Lentelmi. Commissioner Lentelmi.
And I would like to add an amendment to the resolution, which at the end of the now therefore be it resolved, add the language at the very end where it says Figure 1, to state, provided that the design of the North Kansas Street match a shared street typology for the entire length using colors, materials, and other design cues to indicate to drivers that the entire street is shared space. This will match.
What? Just a second? Okay.
Second.
Okay. Can you please read that back slowly so that Ms. Bowling has it? And then.
Or if you can provide us with a copy after the, thank you.
So Ms. Bowling has it.
One more time.
You can also provide a copy after.
The end of the resolution, which is Figure 1, provided the design of North Kansas Street match a shared street typology for the entire length using colors, materials, and other design cues to indicate to drivers that the entire street is shared space.
Do you have that, Ms. Bowling? Okay, that was seconded by Commissioner Guerin. Mr. Lentelmi, do you want to speak to your motion?
Yes, I'm offering this amendment to bring the Planning Commission's voice in line or to support the Transportation Commission that made a similar motion which passed on a 9-to-1 vote.
Thank you. Any discussion? Commissioner Siegel.
I've sort of gone back and forth in my mind about this arrangement and the response of the Transportation Commission, and I don't think I can support the idea of this being a shared street. It seems to me, comparing it to the Wharf Street, there I think you really have a balance between pedestrian interest and cars, and the pedestrians actually outnumber the cars. I drove that street a while ago, and it was really shocking. I think it was my first experience with a shared street. This street strikes me as very utilitarian. I don't know that anybody's going to stroll down this street as it's now bounded by the Apposite on one hand, and we don't quite know what will come on the other side of the street. So because I see it as a sort of utilitarian street, the safety issue concerns me, because I think you will have you'll have the cars coming into the various cars and trucks coming into the various openings, exits, and entrances of the building, you may have people walking and biking to go as they learn the new configuration. But I think they'll be outnumbered by the cars, it seems to me, and therefore the safety issue as outlined by staff was the thing that I think tipped the balance in my mind. So I don't think, respectfully, I can support the amendment.
Commissioner Latemi, I'll give you the last word. So in conformance with Roberts, so other speakers, I saw Commissioner Hughes and then Commissioner Morton.
I'm still not clear whether it's, whether we are okay with the split typology. Is there anything that precludes it going back to a shared street in the event that everything gets developed as anticipated?
Mr. Gibson?
I mean, the county board could change it on a motion, certainly.
Commissioner Hughes?
I'm not terribly going to get too caught up in typology. The addition of the enhanced pavement treatment north of the parking garage was a late add. It wasn't in our last SPRC. I'm supportive of it in the design concept, and I understand staff's rationale. I'm not necessarily supportive of bringing that same treatment all the way down to Washington Boulevard, so I think I'm more in line with Commissioner Siegel's position. And I think that I could come to a position, Commissioner Latemi, where I do support the full shared street aspect at a future build-out, given what actually does come in with the Y and what it does look like. But given that unknown at this point, I'm comfortable with where staff is at on this one, and so therefore I don't intend to support the motion.
Commissioner McSweeney, Commissioner Ricks, and then Commissioner Steinberger.
I too have been going back and forth on this, and the thing that sways me to not support your motion, Commissioner Lantelme, is the fact that if we have the pavement to the north have a different treatment than the one leading up to the ingress and egress to the garage, I think that sends a very specific message to drivers, maybe to not continue beyond the entrance to the garage. And I think that in support of, what the neighborhood would like to see, which is very few cars on that part of it, I think I like the dual treatment, and knowing full well that we could also change it in the future, or staff could recommend to change it in the future if it just isn't working.
Commissioner Ricks.
My comments are very similar. I'm indifferent about the paving for the south part of the road, but having the change in material, to me, does seem to have some value. I think there are going to be a certain number of vehicles that turn in there that don't go into the garage, so inevitably they are going to have to do the turnaround. However, the change in material is probably naturally going to slow them down and make them be more aware when they proceed further north and do that turnaround. So I see value in that material change.
Thank you, Commissioner Ricks. Commissioner Steinberger.
Thank you. I do want to say that I share some of the concerns that have been kind of obliquely expressed with regards to car confusion, and I do think we're signing on for a certain amount of that with sort of the split use and the split design of the topographies. That said, I appreciate that what we're looking at this point is an incremental change, and that really with what the Y may or may not come in with in terms of a development plan and what that looks like and when that looks like, I think that at this point in time, it's a hard decision, but I think at the end of the day, I am appreciative of trying to make this an incremental change, and that I am convinced that nothing we approve at this point to have the kind of two types of topography and the shared topography, that split, will preclude other changes in the future. And I think if we went to a full shared streetscape on that road, then on the proposed road, then it would be much harder to backtrack and from that. And so I am going to not support the amendment. Sorry.
Other comments? I too am going to, I think, oppose the amendment for some of the reasons that Commissioner Ricks articulated. I am concerned, though, that kind of maybe more broadly, that kind of how we might apply shared streets for some of the reasons that Mr. Gibson outlined for why that first part of North Kansas may not be appropriate for that. And so be interested to see as we kind of go through other site plans with fire access, how we're being able to use this kind of new street typology. Certainly not something we're going to solve this evening, but okay. Any other discussion? I said I would give Mr. Lantelmi the last word. It is yours.
Actually, my response is sort of the flip of Commissioner Steinberger's, because once it's built, it won't change. The money will not be there, the desire will not be there. Who will pay for it will not be decided. Once we lock it in, even if we say, okay, it'll be a shared street, it won't change because it is already a fact on the ground that is built in, and it's going to be there for decades, because it won't change until it comes up in the normal cycle of things. So whatever happens there now will be there for decades to come, regardless of what we want it to be. So that is my reason for wanting it to be done now as a shared street. It'll be there. It can always be used as a regular street, but it will have that feel of a shared street that however we develop, and man, the special glove study, we as a body did recommend shared streets to be the typology through this site for the new rights of way. And I felt that this is consistent with our vision for the special glove study plus, and to put something there that will be there regardless of what we think in the future. So that was my reason. So again, it's the flip of Commissioner Steinberger's argument.
Thank you, Mr. Lantelmi. All right. Now the question comes on his motion to amend the motion that Commissioner Hughes made. So all in favor of Commissioner Lantelmi's motion, please say aye. It's like it's 4. All opposed. Any abstentions? Do you have that, Ms. Bowling? Okay. And I don't believe there's any abstentions, so that motion fails. So we're back to the underlying motion made by Commissioner Hughes. Are there any other amendments? Okay, the question, any other discussion? Question comes on the motion made by Mr. Hughes. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, Commissioner Gearin is opposed, and there's no abstentions. I want to thank everybody for coming out this evening. That concludes our business tonight, and we are in recess until Wednesday evening.
Hey, do you guys have that's very nice of you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Very nice.